Warrior Lore. Chapter 3584. Hua de closed his eyes and sat there quietly. There wasn't much noise in the palace. There were only whispers. Most of them were transmitting their voices through telepathy. Hong Songzi followed the boy who led the way to the side of a large pillar and sat down. Xiao Hua and the others also sat down on the side under the arrangement of the boy standing by the side. Chang Yu and the others were led by the boy to another part of the palace to sit down. Xiao Hua sat down and looked around. The cultivators who had opened their eyes slightly nodded their heads. As for the cultivators who were whispering to each other, they continued to whisper about something and ignored Xiao Hua. Thus, Xiao Hua asked Hong Songzi a few questions and immediately closed his eyes. He slowly comprehended the cultivation method of scattered nascent soul in his mind. This cultivation method was not only useful for Hong Songzi, but Xiao Hua also faintly felt that he could benefit a lot from it. After half an hour, a bell rang. Not far behind Hua de Daoist, a boy with a small hammer hit a fiery red bell that was half a head taller than him. Along with the sound of the bell, the entire palace became silent. Everyone looked up at Daoist Hua de. Of course, the instant the boy's hammer landed on the big bell, Hua de Daoist opened his eyes. Two scorching flames flashed out from Hua de Daoist's eyes, and then they turned into sparks and disappeared. Hua de Daoist's one red and one black eyes slightly turned, and he looked at all the cultivators in the hall. When his gaze landed on Xiao Hua, an indescribable scorching heat came from Xiao Hua's skin, as if Hua de Daoist's eyes were releasing true fire. "Fellow Daoists, please." Daoist Hua de withdrew his gaze, and his eyes returned to their original pitch-black color. He immediately raised his hand and cupped his fist. "Thank you for thinking so highly of this old man. After receiving the invitation, you all came to this old man's place for a banquet. Thank you, Daoist Hua de, for giving us this banquet," the cultivators said in unison. Their voices caused the candles in the palace to rapidly flicker. Daoist Hua de laughed and clapped his hands. "Every time I hear the voices of so many fellow Daoists, this old man is happy from the bottom of my heart. The rise of my Dao sect is on the shoulders of all of you fellow Daoists. The fire seed of my Dao sect is also in your hearts. Come, bring wine to all of you fellow Daoists." Following Hua de Zhenren's command, the jade table in front of everyone flashed with a lotus-like flame. Within the flame, a sapling raised its head. In just a moment, the sapling grew more than 2 feet above the jade table. At this moment, a strong wind blew through the entire hall. The sapling swayed in the wind. Every time it swayed, a branch would grow out from the sapling. In just a moment, the sapling had turned into several branches, and on each branch was a fist-sized bud that was about to bloom. "Fellow Daoists, this is my leaf fire fruit, a specialty of the leaf fire nation. There is also dry fire wine. Please have a taste." Following Daoist Hua de's voice, the flower buds slowly opened to reveal fiery red fruits the size of dates and jade pots the size of fists. Looking at the dates in front of him, Xiao Hua was slightly absent-minded. His gaze was also somewhat wandering. Yes, the last time he participated in the Nascent Soul Wine Party, it was in Haoming City. That was the wine party of the 3 elders of the Ardent Fire Mountain. The 3 of them looked very ugly, and their behavior was especially protective. Thinking about how the 3 elders forced him that day and Shue's loyalty, and then thinking about how the 3 elders of the Ardent Fire Mountain and Shui were no longer in this world after more than 100 years, Xiao Hua's heart was filled with mixed feelings. Daoist Hua de's voice was slightly boastful, not only because he was able to hold such a banquet in this temporary cave, but also because there were only a handful of nascent soul cultivators below the level of Confucian on the hidden immortal continent. Not to mention, these spirit fruits and spirit wine were rare in the eyes of ordinary cultivators. How could Daoist Hua de take out so much at once? Seeing the strange expressions in the eyes of the surrounding nascent soul cultivators, whether it was surprise, jealousy, or greed, Daoist Hua de was very happy. However, when Hua de Daoist waved his hand in the air and flames flickered in his hand, a fiery red jade cup appeared. Inside, a cluster of crimson flames mixed with a black flame flew out. Hua de Daoist looked around and was about to speak when he happened to see Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's expression was clearly different from the others, But what a Taoist didn't care. There were many cultivators who were absent-minded today, so he didn't care about Xiao Hua. Fellow cultivators, Taoist Huade withdrew his gaze and looked at the jade cup in his hand. He raised his voice. The last time I came to Yaodai Mountain was 1,000 years ago. I still remember that there was snow on that day. It was as big as a banquet. I stepped on the snow to come here. Fellow cultivators thought highly of me and waited in the snow. I was moved. When I saw Grand Master Kong Hongwu, I bluntly told him that the Taoist cultivators and Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent had coexisted for thousands of years. Although all kinds of estrangement in the ancient times caused the current situation, this situation couldn't last long. Our common enemy was the Buddhist sect. Taoist and Confucian cultivators should be friends. Brothers. This so-called Yaodai Mountain gathering actually didn't need to exist. The drawing of the state preceptor every 10 years was simply meaningless. Grandmaster Kong's face was ashamed. Although he didn't say anything in front of everyone, he privately held my hand and said, "Fellow immortal Huada, everything is understood without words. Senior and fellow immortal are close friends." Ha ha ha, this old guy actually showed off in front of me and called himself a senior. But this old guy really has a good appearance. I can't compare with him. After that day, beyond my expectation, there were more than 400 state preceptors' lots in the Yaodai Mountain gathering. Although Grand Master Kong didn't say anything, I faintly felt it in my heart. Senior Huada, a Yuanian cultivator who was a little closer to Taoist Huade, stood up and bowed. He said, "I know about the Yaodai Mountain gathering 1,000 years ago. At that time, I was still a Jindan cultivator and also came to Yaodai Mountain to join in the fun. I know that in the previous Yaodai Mountain gathering, the number of the state preceptors' lots was at most 200, but I didn't expect that it suddenly increased to 400. I was really excited at that time. To tell you the truth, I didn't intend to participate in that year. But I couldn't resist the temptation of the state preceptors' lots and rushed to Yaodai Mountain to try my luck. Unfortunately, my cultivation was too shallow and I didn't gain anything in the end. But it wasn't until now that I knew the reason was actually senior. Senior. Alas, I don't know what words to use to express my inner excitement. Come, fellow cultivators, let's all get up and toast Taoist Huada on behalf of the Taoist cultivators of the hidden immortal continent. We thank him for speaking up for us and for his efforts for our Taoist sects." That Yuanian cultivator raised his cup. The other Yuanian cultivators and the Jindan cultivators in the distance all got up and said in unison, "We thank Taoist Huada. Hee. This first cup of wine was originally for all of you. But I didn't expect that my words would reveal some secrets." Taoist Huada's small face was smiling like a flower. He raised his wine cup and twirled it. "Good, in that case, thank you, fellow cultivators. Please, today." Speaking up to here, Taoist Huada's brows slightly wrinkled. His gaze paused at the place where Xiaohua was sitting and immediately moved away. He continued, "It's rare for us to gather together. We must enjoy ourselves to the fullest. After the banquet, we'll take a rest. This old man has brought a lot of good things, which will certainly satisfy all of you fellow cultivators." Fellow cultivator Xiao? Xiaohua was originally sitting not far behind Hong Songzi and the others. He was somewhat absent-minded. Taoist Yuan Qing and the others naturally didn't notice. Seeing Taoist Huada's obvious frown, how could they not understand? They hurriedly turned their heads and immediately saw Xiaohua sitting upright behind the jade table and looking at the flaming wine cup. Oh? Xiaohua was only stunned for a moment. His mind entered the dark side of the space to look at Hong Songzi. Hearing Hong Songzi's call, he immediately woke up. Looking at the surrounding cultivators standing up, he bitterly smiled and waved his hand. The wine cup fell into his hand. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. That originally crimson jade wine cup touched Xiaohua's palm and suddenly turned into nothingness. Xiaohua stretched out his hand to grab the cup, but unexpectedly grabbed nothing. Hee. An unknown Yuanian cultivator next to him sneered and said loudly, "Many thanks for Taoist Huada's wine. I'm also looking forward to the transaction after the banquet." To Taoist Huada. To Taoist Huada. When that cultivator took the lead, the others all raised their cups and looked at Taoist Huada. Taoist Huda smiled and opened his mouth. A wisp of fire flew out from the wine cup. The fire sparkled in the air with a crimson brilliance. There was actually a faint shadow of a firebird. It flapped its wings a few times and flew into Taoist Huda's mouth. The red light on Taoist Huda's face flashed. When his eyes opened and closed, a wisp of fire also appeared. Immediately after, Taoist Huda smiled and tilted the jade cup in his hand forward. The jade cup was empty. Seeing Taoist Huda drink it in one gulp, everyone raised their cups or drank it in front of their mouths. Only Xiao Hua stood there with a faint smile on his face and watched the others drink. Whether it was Hong Songzi or Taoist Yuqing, there was helplessness in their eyes. They wanted to help Xiao Hua out of the embarrassment, but in front of Taoist Huda, they didn't dare to. They could only smile apologetically at Xiao Hua and raise their cups to drink. However, Hai Hongzi shook his head slightly. He had already excluded Xiao Hua from the scope of cooperation. After all, today Xiao Hua offended Taoist Huda because of a small detail. From this detail, Hai Hongzi could see clearly that Taoist Huda was not very broad-minded. He might even seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Although Xiao Hua's strength was similar to his, or even a little stronger, compared with Taoist Huda, he was not just a little bit weaker. After all, one was in the middle stage of yuanying, and the other was in the late stage of yuanying. In particular, Taoist Huda had a very good relationship with the Confucian cultivator. This time, he was invited by the Confucian cultivator. Since Xiao Hua was going to participate in the Yaodai gathering, it was inevitable that he would fall into the hands of Taoist Huda. If he was mixed with Xiao Hua, it was really unwise. -12. Chapter 3585. Hai Hongzi drank a cup of spirit wine, along with everyone else. He felt a pure fire elemental energy of heaven and earth suddenly emerge from his stomach and rush straight to his head. Hai Hongzi was overjoyed. He didn't dare to neglect it. Without waiting to sit down cross-legged, he immediately used his cultivation method to refine the fire elemental energy of heaven and earth. At his level of cultivation, ordinary spirit wine could only be used for entertainment. He didn't expect this fire spirit wine to have such an effect. Tisk. After a while, another nascent soul cultivator sighed with emotion like Hai Hongzi. Fellow Taoist Huda, I have long heard of the fire spirit wine's effect, but I never had the chance to taste it. I didn't expect to encounter it on Yaodai Mountain. To think that fellow Taoist actually let us drink this kind of spirit wine. Alas, this kind of extravagance. I'm afraid only Huda Zhenren on the hidden immortal continent can do it. Xiao Hua still stood there quietly. He didn't feel embarrassed at all. He looked at the cultivator who spoke with interest. This cultivator's expression indeed looked very emotional. He didn't have the kind of flattery that he imagined. Looking at the cultivators around him, he waved his hand and picked up a second cup of wine. Some raised their cups to Huda Zhenren, while others drank it in one gulp. They simply ignored Huda Zhenren. Thinking back to when Chang Yu and the others were drinking and eating in his palace, Xiao Hua somewhat understood that the life of Taoist cultivators below Confucian cultivation was indeed difficult. Fellow Taoist Xian Pu's words are too exaggerated. Huda Zhenren laughed. I'm only at the upper fourth level of elemental energy. There are many Taoist seniors above me. They are much more powerful than me. Fellow Taoist Huda's words are wrong again. I'm not talking about powerful strength. The cultivator named Xian Pu shook his head. There are Taoist seniors on the hidden immortal continent. I've heard of many of them. How many of them would stand up for our Taoist cultivators? Now, how many people are as righteous, benevolent, and righteous as fellow Taoist? Huda Zhenren smiled. He felt very happy in his heart, but he hurriedly waved his hand. Xian Pu Zhenren is the one who is wrong. I don't know what the seniors have done. How can I compare with them? My fire spirit wine is just rich in elemental energy, but the wine's effect is not strong. How can you get drunk before drinking it? That's right, Taoist Master Xuanpu is really drunk. On the other side of Taoist Huda, another cultivator with an ancient face said, although our Tao sect is in decline, over the years, many of our seniors have died at the hands of Confucian cultivators in order to revive our Tao sect. Fellow Taoist Huda is indeed chivalrous. But compared to these seniors, you're still lacking. When Hua de Zhenren heard this, his expression changed drastically. Although this cultivator had compared him to the senior cultivators of the Tao sect, it didn't seem inappropriate. Furthermore, he was only at the upper stage of the 4th grade of Essence Force. Compared to the 5th and 6th grade of Essence Force, he was indeed much weaker. However, everyone knew that he was on good terms with the Confucian cultivator, and he had even shown off just now. Now, that cultivator actually talked about the death of a Taoist senior. Wasn't he clearly not giving him any face? Would he say that he was a lackey of the Confucian cultivators? You. Who are you? Taoist Hua de naturally wouldn't speak. Taoist Master Xuanpu frowned and asked, then turned to Taoist Hua de, thinking that he would recognize this person. This old man is Taoist Master Ching Su, a nameless person. The cultivator's tone was still indifferent. I'm currently residing in Yong Province's Great Song Mountain. I'm merely a carefree person with no connection to the Confucian cultivators. It's no wonder that you two fellow Taoists don't recognize me. Taoist Hua De's expression froze and the flames around his body flickered. He asked with a cold voice, Taoist Master Ching Su, what do you mean by no connection to the Confucian cultivators? Could it be that this old man is wrong in asking for the death of a Tao sect disciple? Could it be that all the Tao sect cultivators under the heavens can't associate with the Confucian cultivators? At this moment, everyone had already noticed this, and many of them put down their wine cups. Xiao Hua looked at the 3 people in the distance and faintly smiled. He very naturally sat down. Although there were some spirit wine and spirit fruits in front of him, he didn't even look at them and only raised his head thoughtfully. Seeing someone sit down, the nearby people also sat down. The previously noisy cave suddenly became quiet. Even the children brought by Taoist Hua De in the distance were stunned and somewhat at a loss. Taoist Master Ching Su looked around and very calmly raised the wine cup in his hand. He said with a smile, fellow Taoists, this old man's words actually don't mean anything. Whether it is fellow Taoist Hua De, fellow Taoists, or even the Tao sect ancestors this old man spoke of, they are all Tao sect disciples. The identity of Tao sect disciples in the hidden immortal continent is very awkward. Fellow Taoists, if you want to cultivate further, you have to take charge of a country. Perhaps you didn't care about the imperial teacher's lot, but you also came here for the scattered treasures of the Yaodai Mountain. Don't forget, not to mention the imperial teacher's lot, even these treasures were all given by the Confucian cultivators. If it weren't for the Confucian cultivators' coercion, would our Tao sect cultivators be like this? Of course, fellow Taoist Hua De's heart to protect our Tao sect disciples is obvious to all. This old man also admires you in my heart. This old man just means to remind fellow Taoists that those who are given alms will never be able to stand on their own feet. Those who are raised in captivity will never be able to fly high. When we are struggling at death's door, don't forget that these miserable years were exchanged by our Tao sect ancestors with their lives, blood, and forceful means. The entire cave was silent. No one knew how to respond. Come, fellow Taoists. Today we borrow fellow Taoist Hua De's wine to worship the ancestors of Tao sect. Worship the ancestors who were not afraid of oppression for the rise of our Tao sect. Taoist Master Ching Su raised his hand and drank the spirit wine. Then he threw the wine cup on the ground and laughed. Alas, it's a joke that there are thousands of people in this cave. The Tao sect has no lofty aspirations, no hot blood in their hearts. What about the nascent soul in their chests? This old man disdains to be associated with them. With that, Taoist Master Ching Su turned into a green rainbow and rushed out of the cave. Taoist Hua De's face changed greatly. Taoist Xuanpu's face changed greatly. Even Xiao Hua and the others' faces changed greatly. Everyone knew that this was Yaodai Mountain, the location of the Yaodai meeting. Although there were Tao sect disciples in this cave, who knew if there were any Confucian spies? Even Xiao Hua, who could erect a blood stele in the Bronze Pillar country, would have to think twice before personally declaring that he wanted to open the Fortune Gate and establish the Tao Gate. Stop! Taoist Xuanpu was shocked. He waved his hand and was about to scold Taoist Master Ching Su. However, Taoist Hua De raised his head and a faint ring of fire rushed into the air and blocked Taoist Xuanpu's spell. He shook his head slightly and said, "Let him go." Everyone has their own aspirations. There's no need to force them. This old man has a clear conscience and can face the Tao sect ancestors directly. I don't care what others say. But Taoist Xuanpu slightly bit his lips. He still wanted to say something but swallowed it back down. He slowly sat down and waved his hand. A fiery date fell into his hand and took a bite. He closed his eyes and tasted it. Fellow Taoists. Taoist Huada looked around and said with a smile, "There's no need to pay attention to him. This old man has encountered countless misunderstandings in the past thousands of years. Today's misunderstandings don't make a difference. Don't let this unpleasant matter disturb everyone's mood." That's right. Senior Huada said there's no need to pay attention to others. This fellow Taoist is probably jealous of Senior's friends all over the world. A golden core cultivator in the distance actually stood up and shouted, "Many thanks, many thanks." Taoist Huade actually expressed his thanks and nodded slightly to that golden core cultivator. Immediately, some tactful cultivators stood up and toasted him. There were also some cultivators who whispered. Before long, the unpleasant matter at the beginning of the banquet was almost forgotten. Fellow Taoist Xiao was a bit reckless earlier. Seeing that Taoist Huada didn't notice the commotion in the cave, Hong Songzi whispered to Xiao Hua, "Even if fellow Taoist doesn't like Taoist Huada, you still have to give him face." Fortunately, there was Taoist Ching Su's disturbance. Otherwise, Taoist Huada would really remember fellow Taoist. How about this? When we're free later, we'll go toast Taoist Huada as an apology. Xiao Hua smiled and nodded slightly. Today, he was the one who was rude first. Toasting with him was nothing. Unfortunately, Hong Songzi and Xiao Hua still didn't expect that before they started to move, Taoist Huada's side moved again. They heard a slightly fat cultivator say, "Fellow Taoist Huada, you haven't come here for 1,000 years. This old man also hasn't seen fellow Taoist for several hundred years. We've endured humiliation for so many years, and the younger generation of hidden immortal continent has also risen. To be honest, not to mention the Golden Core disciples who came to this banquet today, I'm also not familiar with many of these nascent soul cultivators. Why don't we let them report their names one by one? First, everyone knows each other. Second, it'll be easier to take care of each other in the future." Good. Taoist Huada nodded and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Jin Su is right. Although this old man has sent an invitation, as long as you're a nascent soul cultivator of my Tao sect, you can come to the banquet. Since everyone is a Tao sect disciple, it's reasonable to know each other." With that, Taoist Huada raised his head with a smile, but the direction he was looking at was not Xiao Hua. Junior Zhang Cheng, from the Chu Yun Pavilion in Yin Province. I just had a baby 200 years ago. Now my Taoist name is Zhi Chengzi. Following Taoist Huada's gaze, a very handsome cultivator stood up, holding a glass of wine in his hand, and said respectfully, "That year, Junior also met Senior Huada on Yaodai Mountain. I was also deeply impressed by Senior's demeanor. Now that Junior has also cultivated to the nascent soul stage, I dare not say what I can do for my Tao sect. I only hope that Junior can be lucky enough to win the lot of the state preceptor and open a paradise for my Tao sect disciples." Junior salutes Senior Huada. With that, Zhi Chengzi raised his glass and drank it. Good. The old man is very happy that the little boy has become a great talent. Taoist Huada was overjoyed. He raised his glass and drank it and said, "This old man also wishes you success and become a pillar of my Tao sect." -12. Chapter 3586. Soon after, a few nascent soul cultivators stood up and respectfully reported their names. They complimented Taoist Huada and offered him a cup of spirit wine. Taoist Huada seemed to be very happy and didn't refuse anyone. He downed all the cups in one go. After a few cups, Fire Virtue Taoist's face was slightly red, as if he couldn't handle the alcohol. When Fire Virtue Taoist's gaze fell on Xiao Hua, his eyes showed a trace of a smile. He unexpectedly raised his hand and asked, "Fellow Taoist, you really look unfamiliar. May I know which cave you're cultivating in?" "I am Xiao Hua." Xiao Hua stood up and said, "I'm currently cultivating in Yu Province's Black Wind Ridge." Yu Province? Fire Virtue Taoist slightly tilted his head and frowned. I don't have many opportunities to go to Yu province. I remember that 600 years ago, I was invited by fellow Taoist Zhenhong to his fish sword cave. At that time, fellow Taoist Zhenhong also invited fellow Taoists to Yu province to welcome me. I don't seem to have seen fellow Taoist before. And indeed, Xiaohua nodded. I've also never seen fellow Taoist Huada. After saying that, Xiaohua was about to sit down. And the fat nascent soul cultivator frowned and said unhappily, Xiaohua, fellow Taoist Huada is guiding the younger generation. Although you're not familiar with fellow Taoist Huada, now that you've met him, it's inevitable that you won't have time to rely on fellow Taoist Huada in the future. Since you're here, there's no reason not to toast fellow Taoist Huada, right? Others have already toasted, but you didn't. Not to mention that your etiquette is not complete. How will others see you? Xiaohua smiled and pointed at the table in front of him. He asked, then fellow Taoist, please help me see which cup of wine I should toast? Naturally, it's the wine of apology. The cultivator next to him was unhappy, as if he was covering for Xiaohua. He said, others all have 1 cup. You can toast 3 cups. It's also an apology for your rudeness. He, fellow Taoist Xiao, Hong Songzi, who was at the side, hurriedly took his wine cup and jade pot, and said with a smile, you're not familiar with the other fellow Taoists, so how about this humble Taoist toast with you? Xiaohua was also unable to discern the true intentions of that slightly plump cultivator. However, since Hong Songzi had stood up, it wouldn't be good for him to embarrass him. He nodded and said, since that's the case, I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist. With that, Xiaohua was about to leave, but at this moment, Taoist Huada let out a cold snort. The entire cave became a lot colder. He slowly said, this old man naturally dares to drink other people's wine. However, this old man doesn't dare to drink fellow immortal Zhao's wine. Fellow immortal? Taoist Huada's words shocked all the cultivators attending the banquet. After all, Taoist cultivators usually addressed each other as fellow Taoist. Fellow immortal was usually addressed by Confucian cultivators, Taoist cultivators, or Buddhist cultivators. Could it be that this Xiaohua isn't a Tao cultivator? In an instant, everyone's eyes were filled with resentment. All of their divine senses swept towards Xiaohua, as if they wanted to see through Xiaohua's true colors. Xiaohua was stunned. He raised his head and stared at Taoist Huada for a moment. He frowned and said, Taoist Huada, what do you mean by this? Nothing. Taoist Huada raised his hand and poured another mouthful of dark red wine into his mouth. His slightly red face became even redder. Taoist Huada opened his mouth and blew out a small flame. He let out a long breath and said, although this old man rarely goes to Yu province, I'm quite familiar with Yuzhou's nascent soul cultivators and late gold core cultivators. After fellow Taoist Zhenhong died, he sent this old man a secret talisman and mentioned the methods of Confucian cultivators. He suspected that the Immortal Palace was training Taoist cultivators somewhere in Yu province. This plan has been carried out for tens of thousands of years, but for various reasons, it hasn't been successful. After this old man received the secret talisman, I investigated it but couldn't find anything. However, after seeing fellow Immortal Xiao today, this old man suddenly became vigilant. He's a Confucian cultivator's spy? Several people near Xiaohua were shocked. Even Hong Songzi and Taoist Yuanqing's expression changed. Several people hurriedly retreated, as if they were afraid of coming into contact with Xiaohua. Xiaohua sneered. The hidden immortal continent is vast. Yu province is one of the 9 provinces. There are many cultivators in Yu province. Do you know them all? Have you seen Taoist Master Qing Su from before? At this point, how could Xiaohua not know what Taoist Huada was thinking? Taoist Huada didn't care about his earliest rudeness. After all, this was Taoist Huada's banquet. No matter what, he had to have a bearing. Taoist Master Qing Su didn't care about Taoist Huada's face and revealed some secrets. Moreover, these secrets seemed to be true. It was inconvenient for Taoist Huada to make a move. He didn't even have the ability to stop Taoist Master Qing Su from leaving. Taoist Huada's face and prestige had been damaged a lot. Although no one would talk loudly at this banquet, there would be sound transmissions. Afterwards, discussions and rumors would appear. This had an extremely bad influence on Taoist Huada. If Taoist Huada wanted to save this face, he had to do it before the banquet. Xiao Hua, this originally indifferent and impolite cultivator, became the target of Taoist Huada to kill the chicken to scare the monkey. As for Taoist Huada's blushing face, perhaps it was a kind of backup plan. If Xiao Hua had some background, he could use drunkenness as a cover. Others might somewhat understand, but Taoist Huada's words were very reasonable. Looking at the cultivators in the Immortals' Cave, which one of them didn't call their friends? Which one of them didn't greet the cultivators in the Immortals' Cave? Which one of them sat down and stared blankly like Xiao Hua? Even Hong Songzi was very hesitant at this time. He was also suspicious. Xiao Hua was a gentleman. Naturally, he wouldn't point out Taoist Huada's filthy heart in front of everyone. He could only beat around the bush and point out Taoist Master Ching Su, telling Taoist Huada not to bully people too much. Unfortunately, Taoist Huada sneered. A little junior dares to climb up to a late Yuanying stage senior? That Taoist Master Ching Su is one step away from the 5th level of Yuanqi. How could he be a Confucian cultivator's spy? You have no background. It's like you jumped out of a stone. If I don't suspect you, how can I suspect Taoist Master Ching Su? Taoist Yufeng, you're the state preceptor of Liao State in Yu Province. You should be familiar with all the Taoist cultivators in Yu Province. Have you seen this Xiao Hua? Or have you heard of him? Following Taoist Huada's greeting, a thin, early Yuanying stage cultivator hastily stood up. He looked Xiao Hua up and down, then shook his head and said, "The Taoist cultivators in my Yu Province can't compare to other provinces. We've always been very few. When Senior Zhenhong was alive, there were only 37 Yuanying cultivators. After Senior Zhenhong fell, there were only 36. I was the youngest. I have never heard of him. Moreover, in the past 300 years, there hasn't been a Taoist cultivator's celestial phenomenon of pregnancy. This Xiao Hua, I have indeed never seen him before." "What else do you have to say?" Taoist Huada said with a smile. "Although I'm very familiar with the Confucian cultivator Kong Hongwu, it's also an improper scheme. I've endured humiliation for the sake of my Confucian cultivator. How can I be like you? Although I'm a Taoist cultivator, my heart is that of a Confucian cultivator." Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. He looked at Taoist Huada and then at the so-called Taoist Yufeng. He said faintly, "Taoist Huada, others might be interested in what you're thinking, but I don't want to know. I'm thinking, you don't know, and you can't possibly know. With your background, I'm afraid. Everyone knows what I'm thinking. If I were a Confucian cultivator, you would have already made your move, right? Why say so much?" "Oh, I'm wrong. If I were a Confucian cultivator, you would have already licked my toes." "Bastard!" Taoist Huada was furious. The flames around his body flourished, and a late nascent soul cultivator's pressure soared into the sky. In particular, a nascent soul hand that was several zhong in size slapped out from the top of Taoist Huada's head. The nascent soul hand was as solid as jade, and within it, there were faint traces of fire. As soon as it appeared, it carried a pressure that enveloped Xiao Hua for several zhong. Not to mention Xiao Hua, even the hesitant Hong Songzi, Taoist Yuan Qing, and the other nascent soul cultivators were all trembling. Several early nascent soul cultivators' legs were trembling, and they hurriedly released their pressure to resist with all their might. Xiao Hua's eyes also flashed with flames. The instant the flames around Taoist Huada's body flickered, Xiao Hua's heart was slightly moved. He was currently cultivating the 5 Qis unifications, and the crimson heart of heaven corresponded to the fire Qi. A cultivator's heart contained fire. Xiao Hua also experienced the test of the fire Qi in the 5 brocade cloud painting. If Xiao Hua stimulated the fire Qi at this moment, and then attacked with external fire, Xiao Hua could imagine Taoist Huada's sorry state. Xiao Hua even believed that his pincer attack would cause Taoist Huada to burn himself. However, this thought only lasted for a moment. Xiao Hua's use of a Confucian cultivator's technique would make him lose his tongue. Moreover, Taoist Huada was a Taoist nascent soul cultivator. If he killed Taoist Huada in front of everyone, it would be breaking off relations with the Taoist sect. How could Xiao Hua do that? Thus, Xiao Hua smiled coldly and slapped his hand on top of his head. Boom! Like a surging tide, A pressure comparable to a late nascent soul cultivator was born. At the same time, a golden hand similar in size to Taoist Huada's nascent soul cultivator's hand appeared out of thin air. It really grabbed the incoming fiery nascent soul cultivator's hand. All the cultivators were stunned. In a moment of astonishment, everyone immediately released their pressure and formed hand seals to prepare to protect themselves. However, they were still too slow. Boom! With a loud sound, the pressure of the two cultivators collided first. A huge whirlwind was born from the void. All of a sudden, the table and other things between Xiaohua and Taoist Huada were swept up. A few cultivators who were caught off guard were also swept up. Not only once. Rumble. Like a thunderclap, the two big hands above the whirlwind clasped together. The fiery hand that made the cultivators feel unparalleled in the world first shone brilliantly, then trembled rapidly. In just a few breaths, it was immediately crushed. It turned into hundreds of firebirds scattered in the air. How is this possible? A group of early nascent soul and mid-nascent soul cultivators in the distance turned pale with fright. The sign of a nascent soul cultivator's defeat is collapse. How could it be crushed? Unless the opponent's strength is far beyond. Could it be? -12. Chapter 3587. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the majestic Xiaohua, who was floating in the air. Fire Virtue Taoist was even more shocked. When the pressure collided, he sucked in a breath of cold air. His nascent soul trembled slightly. When a powerful magic power surged over, without waiting for him to activate his magic power, that magic power had already crushed his nascent soul's hand. Under the backlash of the magic power, a mouthful of essence blood flowed up. I am Taoist Master Xiao. How can you taint my foundation? Erecting a bloodsteel in Seven Suns Temple, killing State Preceptor in Black Wind Ridge, killing Prime Minister's father in front of Jade Mountain. If you weren't a friend of Taoist, would you have already offered your head as a sacrifice? Xiaohua arrogantly flew into the air. His gaze was like a knife, sweeping past Fire Virtue Taoist. Then, without turning into a rainbow, he slowly flew out. Xiaohua flew extremely slowly, but his aura was like a rainbow. Not to mention the nascent soul cultivators were dumbfounded, not daring to speak. Even Fire Virtue Taoist's gaze flickered. Although his natal magic treasure and nascent soul were already prepared, he still didn't dare to move. That move of Xiaohua's earlier had truly intimidated him. If it wasn't for the fact that Xiaohua was at the upper stage of the 4th grade of essence energy and had the strength of the lower stage of the 5th grade of essence energy, how could he possibly injure him in one move? He couldn't be sure if Xiaohua would still be able to keep his life after he used his magic treasure. Taoist Master Xiaohua. I know, it's Xiaohua, Bronze Pillar State's Xiaohua. Taoist Master Yufeng, who had long been hiding in the distance, suddenly seemed to wake up. He cried out ecstatically, the world's Taoist sects have long declined. Today, the hidden immortal Taoist gate opens. With me, Xiaohua, in the world, you dare to let your disciples be bullied? Such arrogant words are actually true. Could it be? Bronze Pillar State's State Preceptor and Prime Minister's father were killed by you? Unfortunately, why would Xiaohua care about them? His figure flew out of the cave and disappeared. Xiao, fellow Taoist Xiao, Hong Songzi called out, but he hesitated again. If he were to chase after Xiaohua now, he would be going against Taoist Huada. He knew Taoist Huada inside out, but he wasn't particularly familiar with Xiaohua. Hong Songzi was helpless. He looked at Taoist Yuan Qing. The two of them exchanged glances, then sat back down. They had brought Xiaohua here, so Taoist Huadi would definitely ask about it. They could only wait and see. Taoist Master Yufeng, what's going on with this Xiaohua? Hong Songzi and the others were afraid of Hua Dezhenren. Naturally, they were not afraid of Hua Dezhenren. Taoist Master Yufeng was somewhat proud and somewhat regretful. He glanced at Taoist Master Huada, then at the several cultivators who were questioning him. Not daring to offend anyone, he could only smile apologetically and say, fellow Taoists, it's actually just some rumors. I can't be sure, so I didn't think of it earlier. The world's Taoist sects have long declined. Today, the hidden immortal Taoist gate opens. With me, Xiaohua. In this world, you dare to let your disciples be bullied. A cultivator with a grave and stern expression said coldly, "Your tone is too big. Even a 7th-level essence energy cultivator wouldn't dare to say such a thing. This guy actually dares to talk nonsense?" Speaking up to hear, that cultivator's face suddenly revealed a strange expression. He shouted loudly, however, "I like it. Damn it. How come I didn't think of such a good word? Come, come. Old brother Feng, let's drink a big cup of wine." Taoist Master Chu is in a good mood. This old man will accompany you in a cup. This Xiaohua is called Taoist Master Xiao. His arrogance is actually on par with yours. That cultivator called Taoist Master Feng scooped up his cup and raised his foot to drink with Taoist Master Chu. Unexpectedly, he didn't put Taoist Master Huadao in his eyes. Then, he looked at Taoist Master Yufeng. "Yufeng, quickly tell us everything you know. Damn it, it's been a long time since I was this happy." "Yes, 2 seniors." Taoist Master Yufeng smiled bitterly. In his heart, he somewhat regretted speaking too much just now. At this moment, how could Xiaohua be as arrogant as Taoist Master Chu thought? In his heart, he really was somewhat angry. Ignorant man. Xiaohua was still flying in the air, still cursing himself. "You really ruined my important matter." This Xiao still wanted to hide a bit of my cultivation, so as not to let those Confucian cultivators notice. Although the matter of the Copper Pillar State was not small, it was still a matter of the country. Longqinga and the others were only at the lower 4th level of essence energy. Even if some high-level Confucian cultivators knew, they wouldn't pay too much attention. I only needed to pass this Jade Pavilion gathering, then accumulate strength. After 10 years, 100 years later, those high-level Confucian cultivators would notice me again. I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to do anything to me. But now, this damn Taoist master who had completely messed up. In the future, this Xiao will be hunted down by Confucian cultivators. Xiaohua was somewhat upset. Yes, Xiaohua had been carefully hiding his cultivation since he started refining qi, fearing that something would go wrong. This kind of careful action was related to his temperament of not liking to show off, but also related to his situation being different from other cultivators. After so many years, he had almost gotten used to it. Although he set up a blood steal in the Copper Pillar State, he still planned to quietly develop his power like before, without attracting the attention of others. By the time others noticed, he would have fully grown his wings, and others would no longer be able to make things difficult for him. Unfortunately, the development of the matter had already exceeded his expectations. As early as when he killed Longqinga and obtained the 5 Qis unifications, he had already buried a hidden danger. Now, Taoist Master Huada had only uncovered this hidden danger ahead of time. Forget it, let's take one step at a time. After I take the Imperial Teacher's sign and return to the Black Cloud Ridge, I'll discuss it with Li Xiang. Xiaohua was somewhat at his wit's end. He could only give up for now. At this time, Xiaohua had already flown out of the Immortal's cave. Turning his head, he didn't see a single cultivator chasing after him, not even a strand of divine sense. "Humph," Xiaohua sneered, urging his figure to fly out of the cave. After flying for a while, Xiaohua saw many cultivators coming towards him. Some entered secluded rooms, but even more people flew towards a fork in the road. Xiaohua had always kept a respectful distance from the fork in the road. When he flew in earlier, he didn't look at it. Seeing that it was very lively and his divine sense couldn't penetrate it, Xiaohua stood still and beckoned to a gold-core old man. "Come here." That gold-core old man was stunned. Although he couldn't see Xiaohua's cultivation, he could hear that Xiaohua's tone was somewhat unfriendly. He hurriedly flew over and bowed. "Junior Jin Hong greets Senior. Does Senior have any instructions?" "What's in front? Why is it so lively?" Xiaohua pointed at the place Jin Hong wanted to go and asked. Hearing this, Jin Hong hurriedly smiled and said, "Reporting to Senior, in front is the trade fair. Today is the last day. If we want to use it when we enter the Jade Mountain 3 days later, we must find it today. Therefore, most of the fellow Taoists have come today." "Oh, I know. You can go." Xiaohua nodded and waved his hand. indicating that cultivator to leave. The gold core cultivator bowed and left. Xiaohua looked at the cave in the distance and urged his figure to leave. After all, he didn't lack anything now. Those who came to the Jade Mountain were all gold core and nascent soul cultivators. With their insight, they wouldn't take out something too good for Xiaohua to take advantage of. Xiaohua was too lazy to go over. However, when Xiaohua just flew a few meters, a familiar voice suddenly sounded. Daoist Xiao, aren't you going to the trade fair to take a look? Sir. Xiaohua frowned. Standing in the air, he turned his head to look. It was Daoist Qing Su who left Daoist Huerta's banquet before him. After seeing clearly, Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, So it was Daoist Qing Su. I thought Daoist had already left. I didn't expect you to still be here. Hee. Daoist Qing Su flew to Xiaohua's side and said with a smile, It's just Daoist Huerta. I don't fear him. However, it's good that I didn't leave. Otherwise, how could I see Daoist Xiao defeating Daoist Huerta with one palm? Daoist Xiao really hid his strength well. Hee, I wouldn't dare. Xiaohua smiled. Daoist Huerta was angry out of humiliation and wanted to vent his anger on others. I only took the blame for someone else. Ha 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 ha. It's all I's fault. I actually let Daoist Xiao take the blame. Daoist Qing Su laughed heartily. He raised his hand and said, Daoist Xiao, please. We'll go to the trade fair. You pick something and I'll apologize to you. No need. Xiaohua waved his hand. I also feel uncomfortable looking at Daoist Huerta. You taught him a good lesson. I just casually taught him a lesson. Hee, Daoist Xiao, do you feel that I's heart isn't sincere enough? Or do you feel that there isn't anything you like in this trade fair? Daoist Qing Su said with a smile, How about I take out my Qinkuan bag? All right. Xiaohua's heart moved. He thought of something and said with a nod, Since you're so sincere, I'll accompany you. Please. Daoist Qing Su smiled and raised his hand. Xiaohua followed Daoist Qing Su into the immortal cave. While flying, Daoist Qing Su also withdrew his pressure. The others also looked similar to Xiaohua. After flying into the immortal cave, Xiaohua glanced around. The entire immortal cave was a bit smaller than Daoist was. However, the advantage was that the two immortal caves were connected together. It was quite spacious. At this moment, there were already quite a few people in the immortal cave. However, these people were still rather sparse. After all, this wasn't a large-scale trade fair. Daoist Xiao, where should we start? Daoist Qing Su asked softly as he saw Xiaohua land. Xiaohua casually pointed and said, Let's start from here. Here. Daoist Qing Su was slightly stunned. These are items used by Jindan cultivators, right? Yes, what's wrong? Nothing, please. Daoist Qing Su smiled without saying anything and followed behind Xiaohua. It was just like the trade fair at midnight in Century City. In just a moment, Daoist Qing Su didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiaohua was like an old lady buying vegetables in the market. He was interested in everything he saw and would ask about it, but he just didn't buy it. How could he be a 4th-level elemental energy grandmaster? However, Daoist Qing Su couldn't tell whether Xiaohua was doing it intentionally or not. He could only restrain his temper and accompany him. Unfortunately, after another incense stick of time, Xiaohua still didn't sell anything. He was really shopping. -12. Chapter 3588. After watching from the side for a long time, Master Qing Su finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Master Xiao, you, if you're interested, just release your divine sense. Not to mention one stall, even 10 stalls can be seen at once. Why do you have to ask them one by one? If you're not a fish, how can you know the joy of a fish? Xiaohua disdained. Indeed, he couldn't happily stroll around the trade fair with Master Qing Su. All right. Master Qing Su nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Xiaohua glanced at Master Qing Su. He also couldn't figure out what this cultivator meant. When Xiaohua glanced sideways at Daoist Master Qing Su, he saw some jade bottles on the table in front of a golden core cultivator. Below the jade bottles, there were a few joints. These bones couldn't be easily seen by divine sense. This was also the reason why Xiaohua carefully checked each stall. Fellow Daoist, please. Xiao Hua walked to the cultivator's table and cupped his hands. That golden core cultivator glanced at Xiao Hua and Master Qing Su behind him. He couldn't see through Xiao Hua's cultivation. Xiao Hua's temperament was gentle like jade, making the cultivator feel that his cultivation was similar to his own. However, Master Qing Su beside Xiao Hua was different. Although he couldn't see through his cultivation, Master Qing Su's eyes were like lightning and his aura was like a king. The golden core cultivator immediately felt that Master Qing Su was hiding something. If Master Qing Su was like this, how could Xiao Hua in front of him be inferior? That golden core cultivator didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly stood up and bowed. I don't dare. May I know which item Senior likes? Xiao Hua originally wanted to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. Now, this jade bottle didn't need to be looked at. It must be some medicine for injuries. This kind of thing was meaningless to nascent soul cultivators. If Xiao Hua asked again, it would only make it more conspicuous. Forget it. Xiao Hua reached out and pulled the jade bottle away. He picked up the bones below and asked, Where did you get this thing? How do you want to exchange it? This thing? The golden core cultivator was stunned, and so was Taoist Master Qing Su. After all, on the golden core cultivator's table, apart from some jade bottles, there were also a few pieces of refining materials. Taoist Master Qing Su did not think that these bones were of any use. The golden core cultivator's face was slightly red as he hurriedly said, Senior, I picked these up from the reef when I was traveling in the South Sea. When I took out the jade bottle from my small chinkuan bag, I poured them all out and didn't have time to clean them up. If Senior wants it, feel free to take it. All right. Xiao Hua didn't hold back. With a flip of his hand, his knuckles disappeared. Then, he raised his hand again and took out a jade bottle. He said, This is the mysterious Yin pill. It's the best for consolidating one's spiritual sense. It's suitable for golden core cultivators. Many thanks, Senior. The golden core cultivator was overjoyed. He reached out to receive the jade bottle and stammered his thanks. Xiao Hua smiled and said, If you can tell this old man the location of the reef, that would be even better. Of course. The golden core cultivator hurriedly put away the jade bottle. After thinking for a while, he took out a jade pen and wrote something on it. Then, he respectfully handed it to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua took it and nodded. He put it away and walked to another place. Spiritual Master Qing Su followed for a while. He couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Spiritual Master Xiao, what's the use of these bones? Nothing. Xiao Hua said indifferently, This Xiao likes strange things. Who knows if there's some big secret hidden inside? Spiritual Master Qing Su naturally knew that Xiao Hua wasn't telling the truth. He smacked his lips and was about to ask more when he saw Xiao Hua quicken his pace and rush to another jade table. Xiao Hua's gaze once again fell on a very inconspicuous material. After another half an incense stick's worth of time, Xiao Hua had visited many stalls and bought many things. Taoist Master Qing Su, who was at the side, saw clearly that Xiao Hua was buying things that others didn't want. Even with his own eyes, he couldn't see the purpose of these things. Damn it, this Xiao Hua is really strange. Spiritual Master Qing Su muttered. What does he mean? Could it be that these things are all treasures? But why can't this old man see them? Just as Taoist Master Qing Su was thinking, the cave entrance became noisy again. Xiao Hua and Taoist Master Qing Su turned to look and saw that there were actually quite a few nascent soul cultivators at the entrance of the cave. Their faces were filled with excitement as they walked towards the other side of the cave, while whispering in low voices. Oh, aren't these cultivators attending the banquet in Spiritual Master Huada's cave? Spiritual Master Qing Su asked curiously. Didn't that guy say that he would hold a trade fair after the banquet? Xiao Hua sneered. He wanted to, but I'm afraid he wouldn't have the face to do it again. Hee, it's true. Spiritual Master Qing Su laughed. He looked around and suddenly transmitted his voice. Spiritual Master Xiao, I've been following you for a long time. To be honest, I want to talk to you about something. Oh, so you want to talk about something? Xiao Hua smiled and transmitted his voice. This Xiao thought you were going to pay for this Xiao. Hee, paying the bill is not a problem. As long as fellow Taoist Xiao likes it, this one will definitely buy it. Spiritual Master Ching Su smiled. What I said earlier also counts. I don't need you to pay for this, Xiao. Xiao Hua stopped and looked at Spiritual Master Ching Su. You only need to answer one, or two questions. If it involves secrets, can I choose not to answer? Of course. Xiao Hua nodded. But rest assured, fellow Taoist, I won't make things difficult for you. That's good. Fellow Taoist, please speak. Do you know about heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence? Heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence. Spiritual Master Ching Su was obviously stunned. He shook his head naturally. I have never heard of it. Oh, then forget it. Xiao Hua waved his hand. This thing was one of the things that Xin Songzi used to cultivate his scattered soul. Since Spiritual Master Ching Su didn't know about it, he probably didn't know about the other rare things either. What about the other question? Spiritual Master Ching Su was somewhat unwilling and transmitted his voice again. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and smiled. The second question is, where are the heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence? Hee hee. Spiritual Master Ching Su slapped his forehead and laughed. This old man shouldn't have asked. However, what's the use of this thing? Where did fellow Taoist Xiao learn about it? If this old man knew, perhaps I could help you. Xiao Hua raised his foot and walked forward again. He said, if fellow Taoist doesn't know, then forget it. There's no need for fellow Taoist to worry about what this thing is for. Fellow Taoist, perhaps you don't know. Even if I don't, I can help you ask. Even if fellow Taoist wants to know something else, I can still help you. Spiritual Master Ching Su hurriedly transmitted his voice again. Xiao Hua didn't understand. He smiled and said, what do you mean, fellow Taoist? Spiritual Master Ching Su also smiled and said, could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao has already forgotten what I said at Spiritual Master Hua's banquet? What did fellow Taoist say at the banquet? Xiao Hua looked at Spiritual Master Ching Su thoughtfully, as if he was recalling what Spiritual Master Ching Su said just now. Seeing that Xiao Hua was pretending to be deaf and mute, Spiritual Master Ching Su smiled and said, Spiritual Master Xiao, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. Let this old man ask you, fellow Taoist, have you met any Taoist seniors above the 5th stage of origin power? Or perhaps, fellow Taoist's master? Fellow Taoist, there's no need to worry about my master. Xiao Hua's tone was somewhat cold. Spiritual Master Xiao, please don't misunderstand. Spiritual Master Ching Su hurriedly explained, I have never doubted fellow Taoist's identity as a Taoist cultivator. Moreover, I also believe that fellow Taoist doesn't have any relationship with Confucian cultivators. What I mean is, fellow Taoist's tone is rather arrogant. You actually dare to say, establish a Taoist sect? However, fellow Taoist, don't you feel that your strength is simply insufficient to establish a Taoist sect? Look at the cultivators in this cave. Perhaps each of them isn't fellow Taoist's match, but if they join forces, they're enough to kill fellow Taoist, right? Since that's the case, why don't they dare to establish a Taoist sect? Why do they still want to come to Yaodai Mountain? Xiao Hua slightly narrowed his eyes. He seemed to understand what Spiritual Master Ching Su wanted to say. Fellow Taoist spirit in establishing our Taoist sect is commendable. Moreover, fellow Taoist cultivation is also truly outstanding. Someone as handsome as fellow Taoist is the hope of our Taoist sect in hidden, immortal continent. Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't stop him, Spiritual Master Ching Su transmitted his voice. However, fellow Taoist must understand that reviving the Taoist sect isn't the work of a single person. Thousands upon thousands of Taoist sect disciples sacrifice their lives for the Taoist sect's existence in hidden, immortal continent today. It's also because of the Taoist sect's seniors' sacrifice over the past tens of thousands of years that you and I are talking in this cave right now. We Taoist sect cultivators should work together and unite with each other. Only then will we be able to stand out. Unfortunately, the Taoist sect's seniors have all withered away. There aren't many who can protect us anymore. It's time for us to walk in front of others. However, when walking in front of others, we need to have a strategy. We also need to protect ourselves first. For someone like fellow Taoist who speaks arrogant words as soon as he appears, I'm afraid he won't live for long. In I's opinion, It's better for fellow Taoists to find a Taoist sect senior who can protect you as soon as possible. Seeing that spiritual master Qing Su first talked about establishing the Taoist sect and said that cultivators should unite, Xiao Hua agreed from the bottom of his heart. However, when spiritual master Qing Su changed the topic and talked about the protection of the Taoist sect seniors, Xiao Hua couldn't help but feel disgusted. Ever since Xiao Hua started cultivating, he didn't dare to say that he didn't receive any protection. However, how many of the seniors who cared about him sincerely protected him? Many of them had ulterior motives, such as helplessness and affection, and very few of them. Fellow Taoist means, without the seniors' protection, we're helpless? Can we possibly be killed by Confucian cultivators? Xiao Hua asked indifferently. Spiritual master Qing Su's growth was different from Xiao Hua's, so he naturally didn't understand what Xiao Hua was thinking. However, he also heard the other meaning in Xiao Hua's tone. Knowing that Xiao Hua had misunderstood, he hurriedly waved his hand and said, "That's not the case. If we were all under seniors' protection, we wouldn't have been able to cultivate to the 4th grade of origin energy." Spiritual Master Qing Su, if you have something to say, just say it. We've all lived for thousands of years. What haven't we seen? Why beat around the bush? Xiao Hua was somewhat impatient. -12. Chapter 3589. Taoist Master Qing Su sighed and looked around again. He had some misgivings and transmitted his voice in a low voice. "All right, I actually came to look for other Taoists. I didn't expect to meet Taoist Xiao. Moreover, I'm not familiar with Taoist Xiao, so I was overly cautious. Please forgive me." And Xiao Hua nodded. "No matter what, I'm a Taoist cultivator. If you have something to say, you can say it directly." "Does Taoist Xiao know about Grand Mist Ancestor?" Taoist Master Qing Su asked in a low voice with a respectful expression. Xiao Hua was at a loss and shook his head slightly. "I've never heard of him." Taoist Master Qing Su was startled. He looked at Xiao Hua from head to toe as if he didn't believe what Xiao Hua said. Xiao Hua's heart thumped. He knew that the person Taoist Master Qing Su was talking about must be an extremely famous Taoist senior on the hidden immortal continent. However, he didn't explain and just looked straight at Taoist Master Qing Su. Hee. Taoist Master Qing Su laughed when he saw Xiao Hua looking at him. He said in a low voice, "Taoist Xiao really knows how to joke? Since you've heard this name, you must already know why I'm here." "Oh." Xiao Hua's tone was vague and non-committal. "I can reveal a piece of information to Taoist Xiao. Ancestor has already escaped." Taoist Master Qing Su's face was full of mystery. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and was very surprised. Actually, how would he know who Grand Mist Ancestor was? Where did he escape from? You didn't expect it, right? Taoist Master Qing Su's face was full of pride. Ancestor actually came out alive from the Buddhist, Confucian, and demon seals. In the future, we'll all have someone to rely on. Taoist Xiao, establishing the Taoist sect, isn't something you can do alone. It's also not something a 4th grade Essence Chi disciple like you can do. As long as you rely on Ancestor, no, it can't be called relying on Ancestor. As long as you act according to Ancestor's arrangements, the entire hidden immortal continent of our Taoist sect is just a chessboard. With Ancestor's approval, our Taoist sect will definitely regain its glory. Boom! Taoist Master Qing Su's words were like a thunderbolt that struck Xiao Hua. He instantly thought of the voice in the West Sea. Thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua probed, "Fellow Taoist, that is Mavarakana's Buddhist edict? Also, with so many seals, how did the old ancestor get out? So what if there are more seals?" Taoist Master Qing Su said proudly, "Ancestor primordial mist cultivation is profound. Even if he was imprisoned by a demon formation, protected by the yin-yang illustration mirror, and suppressed by the Mahavairakana Buddha's edict, he could still escape." Hiss! Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He finally understood who was released from the eye of the West Sea when he had just arrived at the hidden immortal continent. Then again, thinking about the Grand Mist Ancestor's ruthlessness when he had tried to escape, Xiao Hua's heart turned cold. Perhaps the Grand Mist Ancestor was powerless to bring him out, Or perhaps he had been suppressed for who knows how many years and longed for freedom, but he couldn't just leave him in the eye of the sea, right? What benefits would he get from following such a Taoist senior? Moreover, according to Taoist Master Ching Su, the Grand Mist ancestor still didn't know how to play up the story of his escape. Therefore, Huang Xiaolong was definitely not a character in the Grand Mist ancestor's story. If Huang Xiaolong appeared in front of the Grand Mist ancestor, how would the Grand Mist ancestor deal with him? Forget it. Xiao Hua's mouth was bitter. He didn't dare to put his life in the hands of others. Since fellow Taoist knows about the Grand Mist ancestor, then the matter fellow Taoist asked just now, he must also know about it. Taoist Master Ching Su saw the change in Xiao Hua's expression and thought that Xiao Hua was pondering. He took the opportunity to say, I will immediately tell fellow Taoist once I have the results. Of course, if the ancestor has these things, he will certainly bestow them to you. Don't worry, the ancestor is very fond of disciples like you and me who are at the upper 4th grade of essence force. Xiao Hua's eyes turned slightly, and he had a plan in his heart. After all, the Grand Mist ancestor had only seen his face and didn't know his name. It would be fine if he didn't meet with him in the future. Moreover, an acquaintance might not be able to see through a person's nature. Perhaps he should observe for a while longer. After all, this Grand Mist ancestor was a Taoist senior, and even if he was a heartless person, it would be a good thing if he could help Huang Xiaolong support the Taoist sect. And then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist with this matter. Xiao Hua nodded. Taoist Master Ching Su was overjoyed and transmitted his voice. Obtaining fellow Taoist Zhao's favor is comparable to Taoist Huadia and the other two. Ai's trip was not in vain. Haha, fellow Taoist Master Ching Su, there's no need for this. Xiao Hua waved his hand. Whether it's fellow Taoist, I, or even the Grand Mist ancestor, we are all Taoist cultivators. When facing Confucian cultivators, we should all stand together. Well said. Taoist Master Ching Su nodded. After the Jadestige meeting, I will immediately report to the ancestor and ask him to send someone to receive fellow Taoist. Receive. Xiao Hua frowned and shook his head slightly. Fellow Taoist Master Ching Su wants me to meet the ancestor and personally pledge my loyalty? Yes. Taoist Master Ching Su said with a smile. Our Taoist sect uses very few resources on the hidden immortal continent. If fellow Taoist doesn't pledge your loyalty to the ancestor, how can the ancestor be at ease? Then forget it. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. I don't intend to pledge my loyalty to anyone, no matter what their cultivation is. Sure. Taoist Master Ching Su hurriedly whispered, Taoist Master Xiao, it's better to speak less of such arrogant words. The ancestor doesn't like it. Fellow Taoist, please, just pretend you never saw me. Xiao Hua raised his hand and gestured. Taoist Master Ching Su hesitated for a moment and said with a bitter smile, with fellow Taoist's temper, I really don't know how you managed to cultivate to the late stage of nascent soul. I have a Taoist heart, a Taoist foundation, and even more a lofty character. Xiao Hua said proudly, I also have a great ambition to establish my Taoist sect. Even the heavenly Tao will help me. All right. Taoist Master Ching Su thought for a moment and said, I will report this matter to the ancestor. However, I don't know how the ancestor will answer or how to deal with fellow Taoist's matter. Of course, fellow Taoist can rest assured. No matter what, fellow Taoist Xiao is still a disciple of our Taoist sect. Even if fellow Taoist isn't used by the ancestor will only help him and definitely won't make things difficult for him. I understand. Xiao Hua nodded. Also pass my greetings to the ancestor. I also hope that he can lead the Taoist sect cultivators to stand at the peak of the hidden immortal continent. All right, I will take my leave now. Taoist Master Ching Su flipped his hand and took out a small jade plate. He handed it over to Xiao Hua and said, This is Ai's communication jade image. If fellow Taoist has any matters, feel free to look for me. Oh, communication jade image? Xiao Hua received it very curiously. This was also refined by the ancestor. It's an ancient communication technique. Fellow Taoist only needs to activate your magic power, and you will know the secret inside. Taoist Master Ching Su smiled slightly. Xiao Hua's eyes turned, and he said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist seems to have promised to give me a magic treasure just now, right?" Taoist Master Ching Su blinked his eyes and replied, "Is that so? Did this old man promise? What do you want?" "Give me the jade slip to refine this item," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "You know how to refine tools?" Taoist Master Ching Su's eyes lit up. Xiao Hua said with a smile, "I know a thing or two." "Great." Taoist Master Ching Su clapped his hands and said, "There are very few Taoist cultivators in my hidden immortal continent who can refine items. With Taoist Master Zhao's help, great things can be done." "All right, I will make a deal with fellow Taoist. And you can also say that I am making a deal with the ancestor." Xiao Hua said with a smile, "I can refine items for the ancestor, but all the materials will be provided by the ancestor. My reward is that the ancestor must protect my safety. Moreover, I want 20% of the materials used to refine the items." "Haha, I don't dare to agree to this. Moreover, I don't have the jade slip to refine the communication jade image. Let me return and ask the ancestor first. However, fellow Taoist, don't worry, the ancestor should agree." Taoist Master Ching Su seemed to be very happy. Xiao Hua nodded and put away the communication jade image. He cupped his hands and said, "I believe fellow Taoist can send messages to me through this communication jade image. Now, I won't delay fellow Taoist's great cause of revival. Farewell." "Farewell." Taoist Master Ching Su smiled and cupped his hands. He watched as Xiao Hua walked towards another stall and haggled with an early Jindan cultivator. Then, with a smile on his face, he turned and blended into the crowd and disappeared. Looking at some materials in front of him, Xiao Hua didn't pay attention to what was behind him. Currently, he was somewhat uncertain in his heart. The cooperation with this so-called Grand Mist ancestor was also an impromptu idea. After all, Taoist Master Ching Su was right. Even if he had a whole body of iron, how many nails could he forge? When he could borrow strength, he still needed to borrow strength. Anyway, he was refining items and exchanging with this Grand Mist ancestor. It didn't involve any karma. "Fellow Taoist," just as Xiao Hua was pondering, a slightly hoarse voice sounded in his ear, "Have you taken a fancy to this spirit fruit?" "Oh." Xiao Hua came back to his senses. He was fiddling with a few materials that weren't considered rare, but his hand unconsciously picked up a dark fruit the size of a thumb. Xiao Hua simply picked it up and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist." Seeing this cultivator in front of him, Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. This cultivator wasn't tall and wore a dark blue armor. His face was covered by a helmet and couldn't be seen clearly. However, Xiao Hua had a very familiar feeling from the bottom of his heart. This cultivator wasn't a human. "Perhaps I should call you fellow Taoist," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "What's this called? What's its use?" "Ah." The cultivator's voice was slightly surprised, as if he didn't expect Xiao Hua to see through his true appearance. However, seeing that Xiao Hua didn't intend to expose him, he calmed down and explained, "This is a snake-eye fruit. It's a commonly used healing item by snake demons in the Thousand Demons sacred territory. It has a miraculous effect on cultivators' injuries. If fellow Taoist wants to participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering, it's best to buy a few. In my opinion, it's more useful than your Tao sect spirit pills." Fellow Taoist is a demon of the Thousand Demons sacred territory? Xiao Hua looked around and lowered his voice. Since this demon covered his appearance, he obviously had some misgivings. Xiao Hua didn't speak loudly. "I am indeed a demon of the Thousand Demons sacred territory." The demon nodded and calmly admitted. -12. Chapter 3590. "I, Xiao Hua." Xiao Hua said straightforwardly, "Do you have anything else here? As long as it's in the Thousand Demons sacred realm, I want it." "Oh?" The demon was a bit surprised. After thinking for a while, he took out a small chinkuan bag and handed it to Xiao Hua. "Immortal friend, take a look. Is there anything suitable?" Xiao Hua took it and scanned it with his spiritual sense. There were many strange things inside, and many spirit fruits that he had never seen before. Thus, he nodded and said, "Not bad, they are all suitable." How do you want to trade these things? Do you want primeval stones or pills? Of course it's primeval stones. The demon was simply overjoyed. Looking at Xiaohua's small Chinquan bag, he said in a low voice, Immortal friend Xiao is indeed a straightforward person. Immortal friend can give these things for 50 top-grade primeval stones. Teske. Xiaohua smacked his lips and shook his head. Immortal friend, you underestimate me too much. Although I like rare things, I'm not an idiot. The demon smiled embarrassedly. After thinking for a while, he said, Then 40. These things might not be worth it, but I spent a lot of effort to bring them here from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. I have to earn some hard-earned money, right? I'll let it go this time. After all, it's my first time. If it was the Xiaohua of the past, he would probably haggle. However, thinking about the primeval stones in the space, Xiaohua gave up and said generously, Thank you, immortal friend. Thank you, immortal friend. Even so, the demon was unexpectedly happy. After Xiaohua gave the primeval stones to the demon, Xiaohua smiled and said, Immortal friend, I'll ask one more question. Did you bring these things from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm yourself? The demon put away the primeval stones and said with a smile, My name is Ingpu. Immortal friend can call me by my name. What immortal friend? I feel awkward hearing it. Hee, then you can also call me Taoist Master Xiao. Xiaohua said with a smile. Ingpa hurriedly cupped his hands and said, So it's Taoist Master Xiao. I've been rude. No need to be so polite. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, Currently, nascent soul cultivators are everywhere on this Yaodai mountain, and gold core cultivators are as numerous as dogs. Who am I to you? As soon as he said this, Ingpu was stunned for a long time. Then, the armor on his body shook violently, as if he was trying to hold back a smile. After a while, he cupped his hands and said, Spiritual master is really a master. This one has been enlightened. Let's return to this Zhao's question first. Xiaohua said with a smile, Perhaps we can have an even bigger deal. Ingpo's eyes lit up as if he had understood something. He hurriedly asked, What do you mean by that? My strength is weak, so it is impossible for me to travel from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm to the hidden immortal continent in such a short period of time. Thus, I contacted some of my fellow clansmen in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. My fellow clansmen are also similar in strength to me. I don't dare to do big things, so I can only do small things. And what other good things do you have that you haven't taken out yet? Xiaohua nodded his head, thought for a moment, and asked. Ingpa knew that Xiaohua was testing him. He hurriedly took out an even smaller Chinquan bag and handed it over to Xiaohua, saying, Spiritual Master Xiao, this is all that I have brought this time. Please take a look and see if there is anything you want. As expected, you have good things hidden away. Xiaohua laughed. When his divine sense swept over the small Chinquan bag, the smile on his face became even wider. He nodded and said, Although I have no use for most of these things, in order to show my sincerity, I will take all of them. As he spoke, Xiaohua put away the things, took out a considerable amount of primeval stones, put them into the small Chinquan bag, and handed it back to Ingpu. Ingpu was overjoyed when he saw it. He looked around and said with a smile, I have received spiritual master's sincerity. Tell me, what do you need me to do? Nothing else. I only want you to sell me the spirit fruits, spirit wood seeds, materials for artifact refinement, and so on from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Anything that can be used by the disciples of my Taoism can be sold to me. Xiaohua said with a smile, especially the white bones and other items in your cosmos sack. I really like them. Really? Ingpu beamed with joy. That kind of smile could be felt even through the helmet. Xiaohua said indifferently, What? Do you think I am joking with you? No. Ingpu hurriedly waved his hand. I just feel that. You feel that it is inconceivable that I want these things? Indeed. Ingpu answered honestly, My demon realm has many magical things. For example, this ordinary snake eye fruit is extremely beneficial for the recovery of the human race's physical body. There is also the life-extending fruit. It is said that it can extend a human's life by 10 years. Others are looking for me to trade these things, but Spiritual Master wants ordinary things. This makes me feel that it is inconceivable. I also want those things. Xiao Hua was happy in his heart and said with a smile, as long as you have something in the Thousand Demons sacred realm, you can give it to me. I will not treat you unfairly. Oh, if you have any cultivation methods, maps, and so on, you can also give it to me. In short, you have many people of the same race. You must have these things that others don't use. You can still take them. Why don't you give them to me? Okay. Ingpa nodded. He extended a hand and said solemnly, let's make an oath. Okay. Xiao Hua extended his hand and lightly touched Ingpo's hand. He saw that Ingpo's hand seemed to be webbed, which looked very strange. How do I find spiritual master? Ingpa felt at ease and asked. Xiao Hua took out a communication talisman and handed it to Ingpi, saying, my cave is in the Black Cloud Ridge near Yu Province's Bronze Pillar country. You can go there to find me. This is my communication talisman. However, it needs to be activated with Dao Sect's magic power. I don't know if you demons can use it. Spiritual Master, please don't worry. I have a way. Ingpa smiled and took the communication talisman. Xiao Hua's heart moved. He raised his eyebrows and said, if you have a message from the Thousand Demons sacred realm, you can give me the map and cultivation method as soon as possible. Of course. Ingpa nodded, but then shook his head. But the cultivation method that Spiritual Master wants. I won't hide it from Spiritual Master. The cultivation method of my demon race has always been passed down by word of mouth. It's not written in words. The cultivation method that can be written on beast skin is actually not a real cultivation method. You don't need to worry about this. Just give it to me. Xiao Hua was about to leave, but after thinking for a moment, he took out a small Chinkuan bag and handed it to Ingpa, saying, this is the deposit for this old man. Take it. Don't let your fellow clansmen think that this old man is cheating you. Ingpa took the small Chinkuan pouch and looked at it. He stood there blankly for a moment, then solemnly put it into his bosom. He said, I'll let Taoist know that in fact, the vow has already been made, but Taoist has taken out so many primordial stones, which really makes me admire you. Spiritual Master, please don't worry. I'll go out now and try to send the first batch of things after the Jade Pavilion meeting. Good. Xiao Hua cupped his hands. Then I'll have to trouble you. Ingpa did what he said. He simply packed up his things, cupped his hands to Xiao Hua, and hurriedly left. Xiao Hua continued to wander around. However, his original appearance had already changed. When he entered the Yuanian cultivator's half of the Immortal's cave, he had already become a completely different person. The Yuanian cultivator's Immortal's cave was obviously a lot emptier. There were also a lot fewer things. However, the atmosphere in this half of the Immortal's cave was far better than the other half, because almost all the Yuanian cultivators were whispering about what happened at Spiritual Master Huada's banquet. Xiao Hua lowered his head and carefully listened. However, after a moment, he understood that it was really as Spiritual Master Ching Su said. Spiritual Master Huada was humiliated by Xiao Hua. He really couldn't continue the banquet. He pretended to be drunk and retreated. His disciples hurriedly came out and apologized to everyone. Then, they wanted to invite everyone to drink. After a while, many cultivators said goodbye and left. The auction that Spiritual Master Huada mentioned was never mentioned again. Previously, at the banquet, many people didn't dare to inquire too much about Xiao Hua. However, after leaving Spiritual Master Huada's cave, everyone had fewer scruples. About Xiao Hua was immediately inquired by everyone. Although it was only killing a country's state preceptor and prime minister's father, which wasn't too much of a bragging matter, but Taoist cultivators had been bullied by Confucian cultivators for a long time. This kind of matter was also talked about enthusiastically. Xiao Hua's ears were filled with the matter of him killing Lung Qingge and Yan Jijin. If everyone had told the truth, it would have been fine. However, the more people talked about it, the more the matter would surpass the truth. Even when Xiao Hua heard it, he also felt that this incomparably valiant hero was not him at all. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He looked at the auction and didn't see anything special. Most of the items were medicine and old magic treasures. He lost interest and turned to walk back to where he came from. After walking like this for a while, just as he was about to leave, an old man hurriedly came in. He looked around and walked to the side of an empty jade table. He raised his hand and took out a small chinkuan pouch. He took out a few things and placed them outside. Xiao Hua's eyes lit up and he hurriedly walked over. At the same time, on the other side of Xiao Hua, a Yuanian cultivator casually glanced over. Like Xiao Hua, he quickly sped up and rushed over. As soon as the cultivator moved, Xiao Hua immediately noticed. He flew towards the old man with a flying technique. When the cultivator saw that Xiao Hua was faster than him, he turned his eyes and raised his hand. A gust of wind whistled down and grabbed at a broken mirror in front of the old man. Xiao Hua frowned and coldly snorted. He waved his Taoist robe. With a loud bang, a force appeared around the old man and immediately broke the gust of wind. The old man was clearly stunned. He had just stood still and didn't even see the situation around him clearly. Rays of light flashed around him, catching him unprepared. Xiao Hua didn't even sway. His footsteps were still the same. In a moment, he stood in front of the old man's jade table. He raised his hand and picked up the broken mirror. He looked at the cultivator who was just sent flying by his sleeve. What are you doing? The cultivator's face was a bit pale. He took a few steps back and the blood in his body surged. After a moment, he calmed down and hurriedly shouted, -12. Chapter 3591. Xiao Hua disdainfully glanced at the cultivator and coldly said, "This old man won't do anything. This old man just wants to take a look at this little mirror. You dare to snatch the magic treasure from I?" The cultivator was flustered and exasperated. "I saw it first." Xiao Hua ignored the cultivator. He looked down at the small mirror in his hand and asked the old man, "Fellow Taoist, how much do you want to trade for this?" The old man hesitated. He'd never imagined that this inconspicuous damaged magic treasure would actually cause competition, and he couldn't think of a way to raise the price for it. Does fellow Taoist want origin stones, magic treasures, or medicinal pills? Xiao Hua asked indifferently. Reverend Shifan. The other cultivator had already walked over at this time. He fiercely glared at Xiao Hua and said to the old man, "I am Reverend Chu Feng from Jingwan Mountain in the Jing province. I am an old acquaintance of Fairy Su Ming from the Ji province. This item is very important to me. I hope you can trade this item to me." When Reverend Shifan heard Reverend Chu call out his name and mention Fairy Su Ming, his expression changed slightly. Xiao Hua at the side could clearly see that this Taoist master, Shifan, seemed to be very afraid of Fairy Su Ming. But Taoist resting sail was somewhat hesitant. This fellow Taoist already has this item in his hands. After all, this is the rule of the bazaar. What are the rules of the trade fair? Taoist Master Chu Feng said coldly, "The rules of the trade fair are not to bully the weak, nor is it to force people to buy or sell. Fellow Taoist, you don't plan on selling this item, so it's reasonable for anyone to come. If you don't intend to sell it, why put it on the jade table?" Xiao Hua naturally would not let go. Without waiting for Reverend Shifan to speak, he immediately said, "Reverend Shifan, there is no need to pay attention to him. How are you going to sell this item?" "Apologies." Unfortunately, without waiting for Taoist Resting Sail to open his mouth, Taoist Chu Feng called out again, "Taoist Resting Sail isn't prepared to sell it, so naturally, there won't be a price, right? Don't you think so, Spiritual Master Rest Sail?" Taoist Master Chu Feng's words were clearly raised. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was threatening Taoist Rest Sail. That is indeed the case. Fellow Taoist, please return this item to I. I took this item by mistake. This item is not for sale." Reverend Rest Sail gritted his teeth and said. Xiao Hua was very reluctant to part with this small mirror because this small mirror was very similar to the IC mirror. When he held it in his hand, a familiar feeling came from his hand. Xiao Hua was almost certain that this was one of the fragments of the Kunlun mirror. Currently, Xiao Hua did not have any magic weapons that were suitable for him. If he could complete the Kunlun mirror, it would indeed be of great help to him. Sigh. Xiao Hua sighed, then swept his gaze over the overbearing Taoist Chu Feng before saying to Taoist Rest Sail, "Fellow Taoist, don't be afraid. This item is extremely important to me as well. You only have to say what you want to trade, and I'll definitely give it to you as long as I have it." "Sorry." Reverend Shifan seemed to have understood and shook his head. This old man indeed did not intend to sell this item. Fellow Taoist, please return this item to this old man. At this time, half of the cultivators in the Immortal's Cave noticed this, and everyone looked at Xiao Hua at the same time. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes as he looked at Reverend Shifan and Taoist Chu Feng beside him. Especially Taoist Chu Feng, his brows slightly raised as he took half a step back. He activated the magic power around him and was slightly on guard. Xiao Hua looked around again. Although there were many cultivators in the Immortal's Cave, none of them were Xiao Hua's match. Even if Xiao Hua put the small mirror into his space, threw out some origin stones, and left calmly, perhaps no one had the ability to stop him. However, looking at the small mirror in his hand and then looking at Reverend Shifan, Xiao Hua asked coldly, Reverend Shifan, this old man will ask again, do you really not intend to sell this item? Reverend Shifan's heart skipped a beat. Although Xiao Hua did not completely release his aura, Reverend Shifan had already sensed it. Thinking about how Xiao Hua had casually stopped Taoist Chu Feng before, how could Reverend Shifan not know how powerful Xiao Hua was? Unfortunately, Reverend Shifan pondered for a moment before firmly shaking his head. That's right. I indeed did not intend to sell this item. Good, good, good. Xiao Hua cheered 3 times and placed the small mirror on the jade table before saying, this item has no fate with me, and you all also have no fate with me. Fine, fine, fine. Seeing Xiao Hua let go, Reverend Shifan's heart relaxed while Taoist Chu Feng's face was also filled with joy. The surrounding nascent soul cultivators were even more astonished. It was very clear that Xiao Hua's cultivation was higher than Taoist Chu Feng's, and even higher than Reverend Shifan's. The item was in Xiao Hua's hands, and only Xiao Hua did not let go. The two of them were unable to snatch it from Xiao Hua's hands. Moreover, this so-called trade fair did not have any real rules. If Xiao Hua were to use force, who would be able to stop him? Fellow Taoist. Someone was unconvinced and hurriedly cried out. Clearly, this item was Reverend Shifan who wanted to sell it. Right now, he's being threatened by Taoist Chu Feng. If you take it, you take it. Who dares to say anything? How can this trade fair have so many rules? That's right, that's right. Someone beside him also egged him on. Could it be that fellow Taoist is also afraid of Fairy Suming? Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. Justice is in the hearts of the people, and justice is in the heavenly Tao. This trade fair has no rules, but my heart has order. I will absolutely not destroy my order because of other people's disorder. Even more so, I will not lose my own Tao because of other people's tyranny. Xiao Hua said indifferently and left without looking back. Idiot! Taoist Chu Feng sneered and said while looking at Xiao Hua's back. Many cultivators beside him frowned and pondered over Xiao Hua's words. Of course, when the few golden core cultivators not far from this half of the cave heard this, they looked at each other and signaled with their eyes. One of them secretly slipped away. Reverend Shifan, Taoist Chu Feng said with a smile, when this old man returns, I will definitely tell Fairy Su Ming about this matter. Reverend Shifan's mouth was somewhat bitter. He nodded and said, previously, I did not intend to sell this item. However, since fellow Taoist is Fairy Su Ming's close friend, I can consider it. However, I don't know if fellow Taoist has a fire-type magic treasure, or perhaps a powerful innate true flame. Hiss. Taoist Chu Feng frowned. Fellow Taoist Shifan, what do you want these things for? Alas, this old man's lifespan is almost up. I heard that there will be spirit items that can extend one's lifespan in this Jade Pavilion conference. This old man has no choice but to go in and take a look. Taoist Chu Feng's eyes turned slightly, and he said with a smile, fellow Taoist must have also obtained the secret information of the Jade Pavilion conference. How about this? Fellow Taoist, I have all of these items that fellow Taoist mentioned. However, if I give them to fellow Taoist, the two of us may not have enough. How about this? You and I enter together. I can take out these items of extreme yang for fellow Taoist to use. I can also help fellow Taoist obtain the longevity fruit. Fellow Taoist can temporarily lend this item to I for use. After the Jade Pavilion conference, you can formally give it to I. How about it? Oh, at that time, fellow Taoist, I will give fellow Taoist enough primordial stones? Reverend Shifan smiled bitterly. He felt as if he had lifted a rock and smashed it on his own foot. At this time, what else could he do? He could only nod and agree. Not to mention the discussion between the two, Xiaohua rather gloomily walked out of the Immortals' cave, used for the Jade Pavilion conference. Wind blew beneath his feet as he flew into the air, directly flying towards his own palace. However, after just flying for a moment, Xiaohua stood in the air again. He turned his head towards a direction and said indifferently, "Fellow Taoist, what is the meaning of this? Why are you following I?" As soon as Xiaohua's voice fell, a faint radiance flashed in the air. A golden core old man appeared in a rather sorry state. He flew in front of Xiaohua and saluted respectfully. "Junior Zhang Chunyang. Previously, I heard Senior's words of, Yaodai Mountain is in disorder, but my heart is in order. I was very moved, so I wanted to visit Senior's palace." "Since it's a visit, why do you have to be so sneaky?" Xiaohua waved his hand indifferently. "If your heart is flawed, why bother others?" After saying this, Xiaohua ignored that cultivator and turned around to leave. The golden core old man looked at Xiaohua's back. In the end, he didn't dare to chase after him. He could only look at the sky and wave his hand. A faint crane-like mist flew out and disappeared in the air. Xiaohua didn't directly return to his palace. He looked around and was about to fly towards the tent outside the Yaodai Mountain. Unfortunately, before he could approach the tent, Xiaohua's brows wrinkled again. He stopped in the air and calmly waited for a few breaths. Then, he slowly turned his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, is there something wrong? This old man's mood isn't good today. Don't make this old man unhappy." "Hee." A voice came from the night sky. Immediately after, a dense brown mist seemed to boil and expand in the night sky. Then, a cultivator wearing black skin-tight clothes appeared from the mist and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, strength is indeed outstanding. You were actually able to discover my boundless dark night. This one really admires you." Confucian cultivation techniques are open and above-board. If they're used in a secretive manner, they're naturally inferior. Xiaohua indifferently replied, "Not to mention this old man. Anyone with an open mind would be able to detect it." "Hee. Fellow Taoist is indeed a person of the passage. Although your cultivation base is that of a Taoist, your every move has the demeanor of a great Confucian cultivator." Although that cultivator's face wasn't covered, it was actually blurry in the night. Xiaohua was disinclined to use his divine ability to check. "Fellow Taoist, is there something wrong?" My palace master heard fellow Taoist's words. "Yaodai Mountain is disorderly but not orderly." He was quite interested in fellow Taoist and specially sent me to invite fellow Taoist for a while. After saying this, that cultivator raised his hand and took out an invite-like thing. With a wave of his hand, he sent it in front of Xiaohua. Xiaohua's eyes slightly narrowed. He looked at the invitation in front of him. This was a square bamboo joint. There were fine inscriptions around it. These inscriptions were like pieces of bamboo leaves. Between the bamboo leaves, wisps of clear air gushed out. A wave of fragrance came along with this clear air. In the middle of the bamboo joint, there were 3 large words, Star Lord Hall. These 3 large words were different from the inscriptions around it. If one looked carefully, each stroke condensed a kind of flicker. The edges of each flicker carried starlight. At a glance, this Star Lord Hall looked like 3 falling stars. -12. Chapter 3592. Xiaohua smiled and flung his sleeve. He didn't accept the invitation and instead sent it to the martial artist. He said solemnly, "I am a Tao sect cultivator. I don't want to make friends with Confucian cultivators. Moreover, the Jade Pavilion conference will be held in 3 days. If I pay a visit to the Star-Lord Palace before that, I'm afraid it will cause a misunderstanding." That martial artist stared blankly for a moment. Looking at the invitation card in front of him, he waved his hand and the invitation card flew back to Xiaohua. He said, "My palace master only appreciates fellow immortal. This trip is just for tea and conversation. It has nothing to do with the Jade Pavilion conference." "Fellow immortal, you're wrong." Xiaohua waved his hand and returned the invitation. He said with a smile, The ancients said that if you don't accept a melon field, you won't accept a plum tree. Since our hearts are magnanimous, why do we have to do those things that make others suspicious? Fellow immortal, you're wrong. The martial artist waved his hand for the third time and returned the invitation to Xiaohua. He said, since our hearts are magnanimous, why do we have to be afraid of other people's suspicions? We just have to do what we think is right. How can other people know? Xiaohua stared at the invitation in front of him. He didn't hesitate. He raised his head and said, there is no scale in other people's eyes, but there is a scale in this old man's heart. There is no weight in other people's hands, but there is a weight in heaven and earth. This old man isn't afraid of other people's suspicions, but this old man's inner demons. This old man is afraid. With that, Xiaohua waved his hand. He didn't touch the invitation and flew up again. He said in a cold voice, this matter ends here. There can be a first and second time in this world, but there is absolutely no third and fourth time. Seeing the invitation fly back to him and hearing Xiaohua's warning, the martial artist's eyes flashed with a cold light. He opened his mouth and a black chi rolled and annihilated the invitation. A pitch-black flame appeared in the black chi. In a moment, the invitation turned into ashes and a few strands of clear chi fell into the martial artist's hand. The martial artist waved his hand slightly. These strands of clear chi soared into the sky and disappeared in an instant. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, the martial artist sneered. Black chi once again surged out from his body. In just a few breaths, he blended into the night once again. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Almost at the same time, above the heavy red clouds above the foot of Yaodai Mountain, at the summit of Yaodai Mountain, within an elegant palace, several streaks of clear air rushed in. On the wall, a three-colored mist surged, revealing a clear and bright night scene. Within this night scene was precisely Xiaohua's slowly flying back figure. These words were spoken by a middle-aged man with a tall stature, an elegant appearance, and a bulging forehead. This middle-aged man was wearing a scholarly robe and was sitting on a wooden chair. Above him was an old man with white hair and beard. He was holding an ancient book in his hand and reading it with narrowed eyes. Obviously, due to the mist surging on the wall and the influence of this middle-aged man's words, the old man raised his head. Although the old man's face was full of wrinkles, even on his forehead, these wrinkles didn't make people feel that he was old at all. There was only an extremely wise feeling. Not to mention that the old man's eyes were moving. A kind of divine light that could penetrate one's heart and lungs appeared from time to time. The old man glanced at Xiaohua's back on the wall and said with a smile, Linghu, what made you so angry? Reporting to Hall Master. The scholar called Linghu bowed and said, these days, Subordinate has been trying to find a few suitable helpers among the Taoist cultivators who came to participate in the Yaotai conference. However, after finding a few, I always felt that they weren't suitable. It's either that they were insatiable or that their cultivation was insufficient. Today, it's rare to see a Taoist cultivator who understands the law and etiquette and has the demeanor of our Confucian cultivators. Subordinate ordered people to bring an invitation card from our Star Lord Hall to invite him. However, he actually refused using the excuse of not accepting melons in the field and not accepting a plum under a plum tree. Tell me, how can Subordinate not be angry? How can Taoist cultivators come and go as they wish? Oh, this cultivator is actually interesting. What's his cultivation? The interest on the old man's face was greatly aroused. He looked at Xiaohua's slowly flying figure and asked, Subordinate can't tell, but he should be around the 4th grade lower rank of essence energy. Heh. He came for the Yaodai Mountain State Preceptor's contract. The old man chuckled, but all Taoist cultivators have a sharp spirit in their hearts. They want to establish a country, want to make some achievements, and achieve great achievements. Let him suffer a bit of setback and know the power of our Confucian cultivators. He will be convinced. Scholar Linghu nodded. Subordinate knows. That year, when Hall Master subdued Taoist Master Huada, it should be like this. When the old man heard this, his brows slightly wrinkled. Scholar Linghu immediately knew that his words were wrong and hastily bowed. Subordinate understands. I won't dare mention these words again. In, you keep an eye on this cultivator. See where his palace is. In the Yaodai conference 3 days later, you can fully display the power of our Confucian cultivators. Treat this as a test for you. The old man indifferently instructed. Scholar Linghu's face showed joy, and he hastily bowed. Subordinate thanks Hall Master for bestowing a star general. However, just when Scholar Linghu gave his thanks, he saw that in the darkness above the wall, Xiao Hua, who had been slowly flying all along, suddenly lifted her head. Her gaze was like lightning, directly looking at the old man and scholar's location. As if she had discovered something, she immediately raised her hand, and an intense brilliance was born. The entire wall became snow-white with a slap. Ah? The old man slightly stared blankly, and Scholar Linghu was even more startled. His eyes unconsciously slightly closed, and by the time they opened their eyes again, the wall had already returned to normal. However, that was in the darkness. Other than the lantern inside the tent, they could no longer see Xiao Hua's figure. Hiss! The old man sucked in a breath of cold air, his eyes flashing with a cold light. This child perhaps has the cultivation of 4th grade upper rank essence energy. Otherwise, he simply would not have been able to discover. Good. Scholar Linghu's eyes showed a kind of eagerness, and he said, Subordinate is most fond of this kind of powerful opponent. If he can become Subordinate Star General, it will be a great help to Subordinate. Ha ha. The old man laughed aloud. It seems you still want to have him compete with this old man's Star General. Hall Master's Star General is incomparably valiant. Subordinate fears he does not dare compete. Scholar Linghu smiled. However, to be able to capture this person is extremely beneficial to my Star-Lord Hall. Thus, Subordinate is willing to try. As you wish. The old man waved his hand. This time's Jade Pavilion gathering is different from before. You must be careful. Do not suffer a backlash from this Taoist cultivator. Oh, right. How is the situation on Taoist Master Huadai's side? Yes, Subordinate knows. Subordinate will be careful. Scholar Linghu bowed and said, Just now, a star soldier reported that Taoist Master Huadi seemed to have suffered a setback, having been injured by a Taoist cultivator. The banquet can be considered over, but the trade gathering has not been opened. This has a somewhat bad influence on his plans. Oh, which cultivator did it? The old man was quite interested. Was it Taoist Grandmist Subordinate? Taoist Grandmist Subordinate did not take action. He merely spoke out to refute Taoist Master Huada, making Taoist Master Huada lose face. That person is called Taoist Master Ching Su, and he seems to know we are being monitored. After he finished speaking, he left, and there was no trace of him. Scholar Linghu explained, because Taoist Master Huada lost face, he wanted to find trouble with a Black Wind Ridge cultivator named Xiao Hua, but that Xiao Hua unexpectedly concealed himself deeply, instantly injuring Taoist Master Huada. Afterwards, he left the immortal's abode and disappeared. Heh, heh. Even if Taoist Master Huada did not recover his face, perhaps that Xiao Hua would have taken action? The old man coldly smiled. Could it be you did not see? This Xiao Hua and Taoist Master Ching Su were singing the same tune, one in the light and one in the dark? Io, not bad. Exactly. Scholar Linghu slapped his forehead and said, This Xiao Hua was disrespectful at the start of the toast. As it turned out, it was for the sake of a falling out later. Precisely so. The old man nodded. Although this old man did not know there was such a thing as being disrespectful when toasting, how many people would dare to fall out with Taoist Master Huadai at a banquet? If it was not arranged beforehand, would Xiao Hua have dared to make a move? This subordinate has learned. Scholar Linghu bowed and said, Send someone to find out where Taoist Master Ching Su and Xiao Hua are staying, as well as those damn little bastards from Grand Mist on the list. The old man somewhat gnashed his teeth. Usually, this old man would be too lazy to pay attention to other places, but they actually dared to behave atrociously at Yaodai Mountain. No need. At this moment, an indifferent voice came from the palace. They naturally came to the Jadistage gathering for a purpose. We will deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, and let them slowly reveal their true colors. Immortal emissary? The old man raised his eyebrows and secretly said in his heart, He gave Scholar Linghu a meaningful glance and said, Linghu Pyron, no need to pay attention to these two people. Go and see how the arrangements for the Jadestige gathering are going. This time's Jadestige gathering must be something that Taoist cultivators will not forget for 100 years. Yes, Palace Master, this subordinate will go and check. Linghu Pyron hurriedly bowed and saluted, then quickly walked out. Kong Hongwu greets Lord Immortal Emissary. When Linghu Pyron left, the old man hurriedly got up and turned his head to look at the screen behind him. On the screen was a picture of the Moon Palace. The brilliance of the moon flashed slightly, and a layer of mist appeared. Then, a light green palace dress appeared in the mist. A tall woman stepped on a cloud and descended from the moon. In the blink of an eye, she flew in front of the old man. Although the woman was already standing in front of the old man, the clouds in front of the woman's face blocked the old man's view, so the old man couldn't see her face clearly. However, the old man did not dare to neglect and respectfully saluted. Take a seat. The woman was not polite. She waved her hand, and a layer of the same faint cloud fell on the chair that Kong Hongwu sat on before. Then, she sat down gracefully and ordered. Kong Hongwu respectfully said, Many thanks for the seat, Immortal Emissary. Then, he also sat on the chair that Linghu Pyron sat on just now. Palace Master Kong. Just as the Immortal Emissary opened her mouth, she was immediately interrupted by Kong Hongwu. Kong Hongwu hurriedly stood up and said with a smile, Immortal Emissary is joking. It's better to call me Kong Hongwu. I don't dare to be called Palace Master. Haha, Star-Lord Hall is Star-Lord Hall. Palace Master Kong is in charge of Star-Lord Hall, so you should be called Palace Master Kong. There is nothing wrong with this. The Immortal Emissary smiled faintly, and the clouds in front of her floated slightly. -12. Chapter 3593. Kong Hongwu hurriedly smiled apologetically and said, The Palace Master in the Immortal Palace is the real Palace Master. My title is just to fool those Taoist remnants. Others may not know, but how could the Immortal Emissary not know? Yes, I know. As long as you can do what she asked you to do, I don't dare to promise you the position of Palace Master, but I will give you a position in the Immortal Palace to prolong your life by 10,000 years. Thank you, Immortal Emissary. Kong Hongwu was delighted, but he did not dare to show it. He hurriedly bowed and thanked her. The Immortal Emissary flicked her sleeve and said, Take a seat. The Jadestige meeting will begin in 3 days. How many nascent soul cultivators will come? Is your Jadestige mountain ready? Immortal Emissary, there are now more than 700 nascent soul cultivators and more than 6,000 gold core cultivators gathered at the foot of the Jadestige mountain. Kong Hongwu answered without hesitation. However, most of the 700 nascent soul cultivators came for the Green Abyss Dragon Saliva. They are in a wait-and-see mode and may not participate in the Jadestige meeting. As for the other 6,000 gold core cultivators, most of them will participate in the Jadestige meeting. As for the great formation of the Jadestige meeting, please don't worry. Ever since I got your formation diagram, I personally urged the 28 Star Lords to rearrange the great formation of the Jadestige mountain. On the basis of this great formation, the heavenly generals sent by the Immortal Emissary worked together to set up the sun, moon, and star immortal arrays. Not to mention nascent soul cultivators, even out-of-body and spirit-severing cultivators will not be able to leave alive. That's good. Someone has already reported this to me. Your Star-Lord Palace has done a good job. The Immortal Emissary nodded. It seems that everything is ready now except for the east wind? Indeed. Kong Hongwu smiled. As long as I open the great formation of the Jadestige mountain in 3 days, we can proceed according to your plan. However, I can't guarantee how many nascent soul cultivators will enter the formation. The Immortal Emissary chuckled and said, Kong Hongwu, do you think I'm just drawing a pie in the sky? Look at this. What is this? As he spoke, the 3 jade boxes landed in the air of the palace. The 3 jade boxes were similar in style and shape. They were all square and several inches in size. They flashed with light, and under the light, the inscriptions were like poems and essays. They were like chains flowing on the surface of the jade boxes. Wisps of clear air came from the inscriptions and fell into the light. Kong Hongwu opened his mouth. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Immortal envoy, could it be that the words you asked me to spread are true? Why wouldn't it be true?" The immortal emissary smiled faintly. "This is the east wind that I was talking about. It's not the east wind that you speak of. But these things are too precious. I feel that it's truly a pity to give them to the remnants of the Taoist sect. If they don't want to, then I'll just make something up." Kong Hongwu looked at the 3 jade boxes with surprise in his eyes and said in a low voice, "Foolish, short-sighted." The immortal emissary said coldly, "If there are no Taoist sect cultivators coming out of the Yaodai mountain with these things, who will believe in the Yaodai gathering in the future? Besides, you said that most of the 700 nascent soul cultivators who came were just spectators. If you don't take these things out, will they come to the Yaodai gathering?" But, Kong Hongwu still shook his head slightly. "These things are too precious. Even if we take them out, there's no need for them to get them. In the past, many nascent soul cultivators came out empty-handed and didn't get anything. No matter how precious these things are, they are nothing compared to the gift that she gave to the Empress at her birthday banquet." The immortal emissary smiled faintly. "Besides, there are very few nascent soul cultivators who can come out of the Yaodai gathering this time. If your Star-Lord Palace doesn't take out something, how can the Taoist sect cultivators be convinced? Unless you don't want to be the Star-Lord Palace Master anymore. Unless you don't want to hold the Yaodai gathering anymore." Yes, thank you, immortal emissary, for your consideration." Kong Hongwu nodded, then waved his hand, and 3 jade boxes fell into his hand. However, in an instant, the hand that came into contact with the jade boxes cracked and formed layers of ice shards, while the other hand was suffused with wisps of flames, igniting the true qi in his hand. Hiss! Kong Hongwu was shocked and hurriedly urged his true qi. After a layer of dark green flashed, all the strange phenomena disappeared. After Kong Hongwu received the 3 jade boxes, he looked at the immortal emissary and probed, "I still have 2 questions to ask, immortal emissary." "Speak." "I have just told Linghu Pyron that the Taoist sect's old man Hengming has revived, and now he has begun to show off in the hidden immortal continent. That Taoist master Qing Su, Xiaohua, and a dozen gold core cultivators should all be his subordinates. If immortal emissary doesn't let me deal with it, what should I do? Or should immortal emissary bring this news back to the immortal palace and ask immortal general immortal monarch to deal with it?" Kong Hongwu asked. The immortal emissary pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "The immortal palace already knows about the Grand Mist Ancestors matter, but I don't know how the immortal emperor will deal with it. In addition, I know a little about Taoist Master Qing Su and Xiaohua. Taoist Master Qing Su has contacted many Taoist sect disciples to submit to the Grand Mist Ancestor. I have already sent people to secretly follow them to see if they can find the Grand Mist Ancestor's trace. If Taoist Master Qing Su is in the dark, then Xiaohua is clear. Although I haven't seen any traces of him contacting the Grand Mist Ancestor, his appearance is very strange. After the Grand Mist Ancestor escaped, he suddenly became famous, and as soon as he came out, he set up a blood steal in the Bronze Pillar country, claiming to establish a Taoist sect. Why would he, a Taoist sect cultivator, establish a Taoist sect? If he didn't have the support of the Grand Mist Ancestor, would he dare to say this? Now that he came to the Jade Pavilion meeting, he must have received the Grand Mist Ancestor's order to snatch the Imperial Preceptor's lot and prepare to help the Jiang country establish a country in Yu province and find a place for the Grand Mist Ancestor to stay. A crafty rabbit has 3 burrows, but this is it. Then, what should I do? Don't worry about it. Since they want to participate in the Jade Pavilion meeting, let them participate. If they can survive, give them the Imperial Preceptor's lot. As the saying goes, the monk can run, but the temple can't run. Since the Grand Mist Ancestor is establishing a country in Jiang country, are you afraid that you won't be able to find him? Yes, I understand. Of course, ignoring doesn't mean avoiding it. This Xiaohua's aura is very fierce. If there's a chance, don't hold back. The immortal emissary smiled coldly. If you hit the small one, don't be afraid that the old one won't come out. Yes, I know. Kong Hongwu naturally didn't dare to ask more and probed again. The immortal emissary has arranged so many things and paid such a huge price. I still don't understand. The birthday gift she gave to the Emperor-Empress. What is it? It's only 3 days from the Jade Pavilion meeting. Can the immortal emissary solve my doubts? When Kong Hongwu said this, the clouds in front of the immortal emissary's face suddenly froze, and the entire palace turned cold. Kong Hongwu was regretting it at this moment, but before he could speak, the immortal emissary chuckled and said, I thought that Hall Master Kong wouldn't be so curious, but who would have thought that he would actually open his mouth? Sigh. After all, the immortal emissary took out these 3 things that I thought were impossible to take out. How can I not think about it? Kong Hongwu sighed. Forget it. There's no harm in telling you. The immortal emissary laughed. You've done so much for me. If I don't tell you, wouldn't it seem distant? Furthermore, the great formation beneath the Yaodai mountain, I didn't hide it from Hall Master Kong, so Hall Master Kong will naturally know about it in the future. If the immortal emissary can't say it, then don't say it. Kong Hongwu laughed. There are many difficult questions in this world, and it's impossible for me to know the answers one by one. There's nothing that can't be said. The birthday gift is these nascent soul stage cultivators. The clouds on the immortal emissary's face began to dance again. Ah, these nascent soul stage cultivators? Kong Hongwu was stunned. He thought for a long time, and naturally knew that he had to get the truth from these nascent soul stage cultivators, but he never thought that it would be from these nascent soul stage cultivators themselves. Or, to be exact, from these cultivators' nascent souls. Hiss. Kong Hongwu sucked in a breath of cold air, very puzzled. Why do we, Confucian cultivators, need these nascent soul stage cultivators? Furthermore, more than 700 cultivators are 700 nascent soul stage cultivators. So many nascent soul stage cultivators? How can 700 nascent soul stage cultivators be enough? The immortal emissary said indifferently, we need 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators. Late nascent soul stage cultivators are the best. What? Kong Hongwu was naturally prepared, but he was still frightened by this number. He exclaimed, Immortal emissary, are you sure? How many nascent soul stage cultivators can there be in the entire hidden immortal continent? Immortal emissary, how can 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators complete it? This emissary also doesn't know. The immortal emissary smiled bitterly. This emissary can only do his best and get as many as possible. At this point, Kong Hongwu didn't dare to ask another word. The lives of 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators, this kind of shocking wealth was definitely not something Kong Hongwu could get involved in. He really regretted asking so many questions now. All right, you don't have to think too much. Everything will be the same as the previous Jade Pavilion gathering. Throw the things into the formation and let them fight each other. The immortal emissary waved his hand and prepared to get up. Kong Hongwu hurriedly asked again, Immortal emissary, since there are so many of them, how many Imperial Preceptors' lots should we put down? The immortal emissary stood up, and a green cloud appeared under his feet, carrying the immortal emissary into the bright moon. The immortal emissary's words fell in the palace. The specific number is the matter of your Star-Lord Palace. This emissary doesn't dare to overstep. You decide for yourself. This emissary only wants to know the final result. Yes, respectfully send off the immortal emissary. Kong Hongwu frowned slightly, bowed, and watched the immortal emissary's back fall into the moonlight and disappear. Alas, 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators. What kind of birthday gift is this? Kong Hongwu sighed and sat on the chair again. With a wave of his hand, the ancient book fell into his hand, and he began to read it with relish. Xiao Huan naturally didn't know that he had already fallen into the eyes of the immortal emissary, but he had already begun to plan what to do after being noticed by the Confucian cultivator. Before he returned to the palace, he had already swept his soul awareness a few times, but didn't find anything unusual. Only then did he put the token on the door and open the palace. -12. Chapter 3594. Of course, there was no one in the palace. Xiao Hua also understood that it was not only because Chang Yu and the others did not have a token to enter the palace, but more importantly, because he offended Hua de Zhenren. He might be stronger than Hua de Zhenren, but in terms of connections and so on, he was absolutely incomparable. Even, maybe coming out of the Jade Pavilion gathering was the beginning of being chased by Confucian cultivators. How could Chang Yu and the others come back? Xiao Hua did not return to the quiet room. He just sat in the main hall and waved his hand, activating the restriction of the Immortal's Cave. His divine sense once again cautiously swept the area, setting up the Du Tian star formation again. Then, he took out the small Qinkuan bag he exchanged with Yingbo, restraining his slightly excited mood. Xiao Hua stretched out his hand and took out a thick white bone from the small Qinkuan bag. That white bone was more than 1 zhang tall, sparkling and translucent like jade. No matter if it was divine sense or Buddhist sense, he could not see anything strange about it. Kacha. A thunderbolt was born from the incomplete white bone and hit the white bone. The white bone floated along with the thunderbolt and fell on the skeleton. The left leg was precisely the missing calf bone. At the same time the white bone fell, lightning water flowed down from the place where the white bone was connected. Good. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and smiled. Just based on this calf bone, Xiao Hua's trip was already worth it. After that, Xiao Hua took out the other items that he had traded with Yingbo. Yingbo's items were very miscellaneous and very strange. Many of them should be items from the Thousand Goblin Sacred Realm. Xiao Hua couldn't figure them out, but if he thought about it with his feet, he knew that they couldn't be anything good. Xiao Hua only gave some unknown spirit herbs to Xiaogua to see if Xiaogua could grow them. Then, Xiao Hua took out the bone he exchanged with the Jindan cultivator. Looking at it with his soul sense, he was even more overjoyed. There were some soul cultivator soul techniques inside that Xiao Hua did not know before. After Xiao Hua sent the bone into the mysterious dark cloud and handed it to the soul cultivator Xiao Hua used his hand to pinch his chin and secretly thought, "This white bone is somewhat strange. It seems to be scattered in 2 planes. Previously, I thought only the Xiaoyu continent had it. Later, I found out that the Western Paradise also had it. Now, Yingbo must have obtained it in the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm. Since the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm has it, presumably, the hidden Immortal Continent also has it. This white bone, who is it? A celestial being? Also, how could there be a soul cultivator's bone in the hidden Immortal Continent? Could it be that there were soul cultivators in the hidden Immortal Continent? But soul cultivators need to consume millet, unless there is another 1 million Ming mountains on the hidden Immortal Continent. Forget it. Let's talk about it later. This hidden Immortal Continent is many times larger than the Dawn Rain Continent. Previously, this Xiao had only wandered around the Yu region, and only now did he reach the Yaodai Mountain. Let's see if we can find Luzhan, or find the way back to Dawn Rain Continent. When he thought up to here, Xiao Hua's brows raised as he spoke in surprise. When Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense, a look of joy appeared on his face. He put away the capital star formation and then took out the token from his bosom. A ray of light shone from the token, and the door to the palace opened. Chang Yu and Wu Tianxin quickly walked in from the outside. When the two of them saw Xiao Hua sitting inside the palace with a smile, they looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, they walked in front of Xiao Hua and knelt down in front of him with a plop sound and said respectfully, "Junior Chang Yu and Wu Tianxin wish to become disciples of the Imperial Preceptor and work for the Imperial Preceptor's country." Huh. Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. His hand stopped halfway in the air. He was very happy that Chang Yu and Wu Tianxin had returned. After all, a friend in need was a friend indeed. However, the sudden kneeling of the two of them was out of his expectations. Looking at the sincerity on their faces, Xiao Hua smiled. With a wave of his hand, the door to the cave closed. Xiao Hua did not let the two of them get up and asked, "What do you mean by this? Why did you suddenly have the thought of becoming disciples of this old man?" Reporting to Senior, Chang Yu said, "Junior came to Yaodai Mountain this time to seize the Imperial Preceptor's lot. Previously, when Junior met Senior, Junior also said that Junior's cultivation had reached a bottleneck. If Junior did not rely on external help, Junior might not be able to break through. Junior wants to become the Imperial Preceptor." Although Junior must rely on the strength of the country to cultivate, more importantly, Junior must find a way out for himself. If Junior's cultivation stagnates at the gold core stage, then Junior can also enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank within the country. However, after Junior met Senior, Senior frankly gave Junior pointers on Junior's cultivation without any intention of treating Junior as an outsider, allowing Junior to feel Senior's breadth of mind. In addition, since Senior wants to establish a country and fight for the Imperial Preceptor's lot with Junior, Junior's chances will be reduced. Rather than Junior going to fight for it with Senior, Junior might as well directly work for Senior. This is also the reason why Junior did not come when Wu Tianxin and Zhu Chengli came to Senior to ask for benefits. Junior was thinking about how to ask Senior. Hee, no wonder this old man didn't wait for you. It turns out that you were casting a long line to catch a big fish. Xiaohua laughed. Chang Yu's heart relaxed, and he said, actually, Junior originally wanted to wait for Senior to seize the Imperial Preceptor's lot before bringing it up. But tonight, Senior defeated Taoist Master Huada, and Junior heard a few nascent soul seniors talk about Senior's deeds. Junior knows that this is a chance for Junior. If Junior does not take advantage of Senior's awkward situation to provide timely assistance, when will Junior wait? Xiaohua nodded slightly, but did not comment, and looked at Wu Tianxin again. Wu Tianxin hurriedly said, presumably, Senior already knows that when Junior was talking to Senior, Junior already had the idea of working for Senior, but Junior is still somewhat hesitant. Junior has the same idea as Senior Martial Brother Chang. Junior does not dare to disturb Senior at this time. Junior wants to wait until after the Jade Pavilion meeting to mention it to Senior. However, just now, after Senior left Taoist Master Huada's banquet, Senior Martial Brother Chang, Zhu Chengli, and Junior discussed. Zhu Chengli said that Senior offended Taoist Master Huada. Although Senior's strength is greater than Taoist Master Huada will definitely take revenge on Senior. Senior's future is worrying, so Zhu Chengli does not dare to get too close to Senior. At the same time, he advised Junior and Senior Martial Brother Chang not to return to Senior's palace. Junior does not know what benefits Zhu Chengli obtained from Senior, but Junior knows that Junior must come back. Out of Junior's expectation, Senior Martial Brother Chang also wanted to come back. Junior and Senior Martial Brother Chang discussed a little, and both of us have the same idea. How can adding flowers to a brocade compare to providing timely assistance? Junior earnestly asks Senior to accept the two of us. We are willing to work for Senior. Xiaohua nodded slightly. No matter if it was Chang Yu or Wu Tianxin, they were speaking from the bottom of their hearts. They didn't hide anything from him, and they even spoke about their thoughts of betting. Xiaohua thought about their actions. Although he didn't really understand them, people in this world weren't exactly the same. It was normal to have some selfish thoughts. Good. Xiaohua smiled. Since you two have such thoughts, this old man will temporarily accept you two as disciples in name. After this old man examines you two, I will accept you two as disciples. Accept disciples? Wu Tianxin was stunned. Chang Yu was even more stunned. They looked at each other with surprise in their eyes. Xiaohua was even more stunned. His face was somewhat unsightly. Thinking about what the two of them said just now, his heart thumped. That's right. They had always said that they would work for the state preceptor and Senior. They did not say that they would become his disciples. Senior, are you really going to accept us as disciples? Wu Tianxin carefully asked again. Xiaohua blinked his eyes and waved his hand in embarrassment. Hee, this Xiao heard wrongly. You wait. We kowtow to master. Unexpectedly, ecstasy appeared on the two's faces. This made Xiaohua even more surprised. He shouted and kowtowed 9 times on the ground. Get up, get up. Xiaohua hurriedly raised his hand and helped the two up. He asked curiously, so you two did not plan to become his disciples? Master. Chang Yu respectfully got up. He looked at Xiaohua strangely and said in a low voice, on the hidden immortal continent, we Taoist cultivators cannot openly accept disciples. We, being able to work for master, is already the limit of Confucian cultivators' tolerance. Xiaohua understood. Li Xiang and the others all thought that he knew about this matter. They never mentioned it to him. Xiaohua laughed and waved his hand. Haha, the rules of Confucian cultivators were broken by this Xiao. Since this Xiao wants to establish a Taoist sect, what is there to be afraid of? This Xiao even wants to establish a sect. Master, Changyu hurriedly said. You can't say this here. This is Yaodai Mountain. This old man knows. Xiao Hua nodded. In this old man's eyes, Yaodai Mountain is just Yaodai Mountain. Wu Tianxin opened his mouth again. Master, since this disciple has become your disciple, then please give this disciple a proper name. This disciple can no longer use his previous name. Xiao Hua knew about Wu Tianxin's abnormality and understood that this matter might be related to his life. He thought for a moment and said, How about Wu Tian? Wu Tianxin was overjoyed. He knelt down again and said, Thank you, Master, for giving me a name. From now on, this disciple is Wu Tian. Xiao Hua helped him up and said with a smile, Even if you cultivate to nascent soul, you can still be called Taoist Wu Tian? Yes, this disciple understands. This is this disciple's Dharma name. Wu Tian was really happy. This was Xiao Hua's promise to him. Changyu looked enviously at the side and said in a low voice, Master, you can't favor one and discriminate against the other. This disciple. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes at him and said, You guys have just become my disciples. This old man still doesn't know your specific cultivation level. How can I give you any benefits? Especially you. You've already reached the late stage of Jindan. After the Yaodai gathering, Xiao Hua originally said that he didn't know the specific temperament of these two people and that he still wanted to test them. However, when the words reached his mouth, he changed them to cultivation level. At this moment, his heart was even moved. He thought for a moment and nodded. All right, since you guys can bet on this old man, then this old man will also bet. Changyu, you better not disappoint this old man. -12. Chapter 3595. When Changyu heard this, he was overjoyed. He hurriedly knelt down and said, Master, don't worry. Disciple will not disappoint Master's expectations. And follow this old man to the quiet room. Xiao Hua waved his hand and ordered, Wu Tian, you cultivate here? Yes, Master. Changyu was overjoyed. He climbed up from the ground and followed behind Xiao Hua. Wu Tian also bowed and said, Disciple understands. Disciple will protect Master and senior brother. After entering the quiet room, Xiao Hua ordered Changyu to sit cross-legged. He closed his eyes and stretched out his hand. A very faint crystal thread appeared on his index finger and fell on Changyu's dantian. After the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua's face was expressionless. He didn't even frown. Changyu's heart slightly tightened. Go ahead, let this old man take a look. Suddenly, Xiao Hua spoke. Changyu very naturally agreed. All right, but before cultivating, a trace of hesitation flashed through Changyu's heart. After all, he was cultivating in front of Xiao Hua. His cultivation method was no longer a secret to Xiao Hua. Of course, this kind of hesitation was quickly ignored by Changyu. This was only the vigilance of a late gold core stage cultivator. It was also the result of not having a master for hundreds of years. When the cultivation method circulated, Changyu quickly entered a tranquil state. The heaven and earth origin energy in the quiet room flowed into Changyu's body in an orderly manner. All right, you can stop now. Changyu's cultivation method only circulated a few times. Xiao Hua opened his mouth and moved his finger away from Changyu's dantian. He said somewhat seriously, There's a problem with your cultivation method. Changyu didn't wait to open his eyes. His face was anxious and he quickly asked, Impossible, Master. This cultivation method of yours was taken from someone else's hands. It wasn't passed to you by someone else, right? Xiao Hua asked with a smile that was not a smile. Changyu didn't hide it and nodded, indeed. Moreover, you've been cultivating for many years and have always been in the late gold core stage. You always feel like you're within the bottleneck, but it also doesn't seem to be within the bottleneck, right? Xiao Hua asked again. Changyu's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. Wasn't this the reason why he wanted to become Xiao Hua's disciple? Master, please give me some pointers. Changyu pleaded. I'm afraid that your situation can only be easily resolved if you become my disciple. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Changyu was puzzled and smiled apologetically. What do you mean, master? Isn't it obvious? If there is a problem with your disciple's cultivation method, what will you do? Changyu thought for a moment and said, the simplest way is to change your cultivation method. Can you change it? Are you willing to part with your late gold core stage cultivation base? Xiaohua smiled. Disciple really can't bear to do so. However, in the end, this disciple can only sever his wrist. I'm afraid this is the reason why you want to become the state preceptor, right? Xiaohua pointed at Changyu and said, if you change your cultivation technique, your lifespan is already insufficient. The simplest and most direct solution to your current predicament is to modify your cultivation method. Changyu couldn't suppress the ecstasy in his heart and said in a low voice, it's not that I haven't thought of this before, but even a late nascent soul stage cultivator wouldn't dare to casually change a golden core cultivation method. Furthermore, how can this disciple believe in a cultivation method that has been modified? What about the cultivation method this old man modified for you? Can you believe it? Xiaohua looked at Changyu with a smile that wasn't a smile and asked. Changyu bit his lips, but his eyes were full of joy. That was really an uncontrollable joy. A nascent soul stage cultivator who can modify a golden core cultivation method. What kind of cultivation base is that? Changyu was really glad that he made the right bet. This old man has a lot of cultivation methods here, but your own cultivation method is still the most suitable for you. Give the cultivation method to this old man, and this old man will help you modify it during these 3 days of free time. Xiaohua said indifferently. Changyu was stunned again and said in a low voice with a smile, Master, can't you be serious for a bit? Don't be too hasty. This is related to this disciple's future. Changyu's words sounded like he was complaining about Xiaohua, but Xiaohua sounded like Lu Yi and Wang Bianfei, the two children, were somewhat coquettishly pleading. It seemed that Changyu really thought of himself as Xiaohua's disciple. Looking at Changyu's old appearance, Xiaohua stretched out his hand and said with a smile, it's just a golden core cultivation method. Is there a need to be so serious? Today, this old man's temperament is good. If you want this old man to modify it, then quickly take it out. If you miss this village, you won't have this shop. Yes, this disciple was just joking with Master. Changyu didn't dare to neglect and hurriedly took out a jade eye and handed it to Xiaohua. After Xiaohua took it, he didn't modify it himself and casually threw it to the green-robed Xiaohua, then said to Changyu, go and call Wu Tian in. This old man feels that there are some problems with this hidden immortal continent's cultivation method. It can't be. Master's meaning is. Changyu understood and asked in disbelief. Xiaohua nodded. Maybe a Confucian cultivator did something. Let's take a look at Wu Tian's cultivation method. After looking at Wu Tian's cultivation method, Xiaohua frowned. Previously, he really didn't think about this problem, but now, looking at Changyu and Wu Tian's cultivation method, there were faint flaws. These flaws were very hidden and ingenious. If those cultivators had never created their own cultivation method or hadn't seen many kinds of cultivation methods, they wouldn't be able to see it, let alone fix it. Master! Changyu naturally knew what Xiaohua was thinking and said in a low voice, could it be that this cultivation method was really modified by someone? Xiaohua nodded slightly. This old man doesn't know about other people's cultivation methods, but you and Wu Tian's cultivation method must have a problem. But, Wu Tian said in a low voice, hidden immortal continent still has many nascent soul seniors. Speaking until here, Wu Tian first mocked himself and said, yes, it's impossible to modify all of them, and even if there are many modifications, there must be some left to let people see hope. These Confucian cultivators. Changyu gnashed his teeth and said, they are really ruthless. Hee, the struggle between Buddhism and Taoism is not limited to this. Xiaohua naturally knew that Taoism's methods were more ruthless than those of Confucian cultivators, and said with a smile, there are many things that you don't know. However, since you have entered this old man's tutelage, you don't have to be afraid of these things. This old man will naturally teach you. Saying this, Xiaohua still threw Wu Tian's cultivation method to the green-robed Xiaohua. That guy has seen who knows how many cultivation methods and secret techniques. Modifying these Jindan stage cultivation methods was just a matter of lifting his hand. Afterwards, Xiaohua let the two of them go back and meditate. When the sun rose, he let the two of them come to the quiet room and returned the modified cultivation method to the two of them. After the two of them looked at it, he guided the two of them in their cultivation just like before. 3 days passed very quickly. The two of them were intoxicated as they listened until Xiaohua stopped. Only then did they wake up. Today was the Yaodai assembly. Xiaohua got up and said, 3 days have passed. Do you two want to continue cultivating here? Or do you want to follow Master to Yaodai Mountain to participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering? Chang Yu and Wu Tian looked at each other, and without hesitation said in unison, reporting to Master, Disciple has already achieved the purpose of this trip. There is no need to participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering. Disciple will comprehend the cultivation method here, and congratulate Master on obtaining the Imperial Teacher's lot and the 3 treasures from Star Lord Palace. 3 treasures? Xiaohua smiled. Although he didn't know what these 3 treasures were, he understood that it was some kind of gimmick from Star Lord Palace of Confucian cultivators. As Li Xiang said, it was to coax the Taoism cultivators like dogs fighting over bones, so Xiaohua didn't ask much. At this time, hearing the two talk, he nodded and said, Very good. This old man can provide everything you need for cultivation. This old man doesn't need to participate in this Jade Pavilion gathering. After this old man obtains the Imperial Teacher's lot, you two will follow this old man back to Black Cloud Ridge and see this old man's magnificent scenery. Yes, Disciple understands. Disciple will listen to Master's instructions. Chang Yu and Wu Tian respectfully sent Xiaohua out of the palace. This palace couldn't be opened by divine sense without nascent soul strength. Xiaohua wasn't here, so Chang Yu and Wu Tian couldn't stay in this palace and followed Xiaohua to fly towards Jade Mountain. At this time, it was already dawn, and the 3 people flew at a moderate speed under Jade Mountain. High in the sky, the red clouds were still covering the sky, and they couldn't see the rising sun. Instead, the rolling clouds made people feel a little depressed. Under the red clouds, many cultivators flew out from the palaces, pavilions, and caves, and gathered towards Jade Mountain. Divine scents swept through the air, and it was quite lively. Hiss! Xiaohua also swept through with his divine scents and sucked in a breath of cold air. His brows slightly wrinkled, and he couldn't help but wonder, why are there so many cultivators? Where did they all come from? Of course, in the air, cultivators were densely packed one after another. Previously, when Xiaohua came, he didn't feel it, and even at the trade fair, he didn't feel it. But now, this battle array was vast and mighty. Of course, not to mention the items of extreme cold and extreme heat. Just the items that can extend one's life by 1,000 years are enough to entice those cultivators who aren't interested in the state preceptor's lot. Chang Yu said with a smile, and finally spoke about the treasures of Jade Mountain's Star Lord Palace. Oh, Xiaohua understood, but he didn't care, and said with a smile, looks like Star Lord Palace spent a lot this time. Other than the state preceptor's lot and the rarities of Jade Mountain, there are also the items of extreme cold, extreme heat, and life extension, 3 treasures? Confucian cultivators are attracted to our Taoist cultivators. The items of extreme cold and extreme heat are the best for tool refining and cultivation, and the life extension items can even give senior Martial Brother Chong and other Taoist disciples who have no hope of conceiving a nascent soul an opportunity out of thin air. Which Taoist disciple wouldn't rush to Jade Mountain after receiving the news? Wu Tian sighed. Even if they know it's Confucian cultivators, the scheme of Confucian cultivators, Xiaohua sneered. At this moment, he truly understood what Li Xiang said that day. For these things, it's already not bad if half of these thousands of cultivators can come out. Master, don't blame them for not seeing through it. Even if it's disciple, if it wasn't for Master's guidance and knowing that my future is bright, even if disciple understood the trap inside, disciple would still have to brace himself and charge inside. Damn, there are at least 1,000 nascent soul cultivators. The more they flew forward, the more astonished Xiaohua felt. Dawn Rain Continent only has a few nascent soul cultivators. Why are there so many in Hidden Immortal Continent? -12. Chapter 3596. Rumble. At this moment, a series of drumming sounds rang out, even more deafening than thunder. After 9 drumming sounds, the red clouds began to roll, and rays of golden light pierced through the clouds. Then, the red clouds began to gather in all directions. In just a moment, they had condensed into 28 huge clouds. On the clouds stood 28 immortal generals in shining armor. These immortal generals had different appearances. Some were thick, some were short, and some were thin. Even their mounts were different. Some were tigers, some were wolves, and there were even some strange rabbits and roosters. 28 lunar mansions? Xiaohua stopped in the air and glanced around. He could not help but think to himself, behind these 28 immortal generals, there were dozens of immortal soldiers in bright armor. Although the immortal soldiers behind each immortal general held the same weapon, the weapons of the 28 immortal generals were different. At this moment, these immortal soldiers and immortal generals all had solemn expressions. The clouds under their feet rolled, and there was another loud drumming sound. Beside each immortal general, there was a huge man who was several feet tall, holding a huge drumstick. He appeared from the clouds along with the huge heavenly drum. The huge men were naked from the waist up. Layers of faint mist lingered around them. Under the mist, there was a layer of oily luster on their skin. The luster danced with their muscles, flashing with a strange brilliance. Ding ding dong dong. Among the earth-shaking drumming, there was another burst of music. Although this sound was not as deafening as the drumming, it was still loud. When Xiaohua and the others raised their heads, in the clouds behind the 28 immortal generals, there were women in palace dresses, either holding a flute or a pipa. There were even groups of glittering chimes in the clouds. After half a meal's worth of time, the drumming gradually subsided, and the music slowly lingered in their ears. A pillar of light more brilliant than the sun emerged from the top of Yaodai Mountain, shining directly at the center of the 28 immortal generals. An old man in Confucian attire, wearing a tall crown, and holding a jade tablet in his hand slowly descended from the pillar of light. Wasn't this the Lord of Star-Lord Palace, Kong Hongwu? This was the first time Xiaohua had seen Kong Hongwu. His gaze unconsciously fell on the pillar of light. His eyes narrowed as he carefully sized up this old man with an ancient face. When Kong Hongwu's figure landed on the 28 immortal generals and stopped about 10 feet away, Kong Hongwu looked around and looked at the Taoist cultivators on his left. He raised the jade tablet with both hands, bowed to the rising sun in the east, and said, "My name is Kong Hongwu, a disciple of the Confucian cultivators. I am entrusted by the Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent to take charge of the Star-Lord Palace. Today is the day when the Star-Lord Palace opens the Yaodai meeting. I, the 1,000-star generals, sincerely ask the ancestors of the Confucian cultivators to allow me to open the Yaodai Mountain and hold the Yaodai meeting." Before Kong Hongwu's voice fell, streams of awe-inspiring aura fell from the Yaodai Mountain. That awe-inspiring aura became extremely dazzling with 9 colors. Along with this rainbow-like pillar of light, a glittering imperial edict fell from the sky. Kong Hongwu very exaggeratedly bowed down and received that imperial edict. Then, he opened that imperial edict. Rumble. The sound of a tide came from the imperial edict. Roar. A huge dragon's roar came from the tide. Soon after, a 10,000 zhang yellow light rushed into the air. That yellow light unexpectedly looked like a dragon leaping into the 9 heavens. It fluttered in that 9-colored light for a few moments, then coiled up and laid down on the Yaodai Mountain. A kind of indescribable dragon's might and monarch's authority was even heavier than the Yaodai Mountain's pressure on the hearts of all the Taoist cultivators. At this time, a voice like a big yellow bell reverberated between heaven and earth. By the will of the heavens, the ancestors of the hidden immortal continent congratulate each other. Today, at the Yaodai meeting, the stars will. Every word of the imperial edict fell into Xiaohua's ears and penetrated the bottom of his heart. Every word was like a huge rock that struck Xiaohua's Tao foundation and destroyed his confidence in himself. Confucian cultivators? No, it should be said that the methods of the Immortal Palace are really amazing. Xiaohua slightly narrowed his eyes, allowing this Confucian cultivator's sound attack to baptize his Tao heart. At this time, Xiaohua's Dao heart was incomparably firm, and his Dao foundation was also extremely stable. It was like a towering dragon rock that towered into the sky. No matter how this sound attacked, it could not be damaged in the slightest. Even in this sound, his Dao foundation became even more solid. Looking at those early Jindan cultivators, many of their eyes began to collapse, and a kind of worship expression gradually emerged. Of course, without waiting for the voice to finish reading the imperial edict, many cultivators flashed with golden light and began to resist this sound attack. They did not see any particularly embarrassing scene, but this moment of shaking of the Dao foundation had already caused some impact. After the imperial edict was read by the heavens, the sound of, by the will of the heavens, fell. Kong Hongwu led a group of immortal soldiers and immortal generals to bow and salute. He loudly said, "By the will of the heavens, thank the heavens for their grace." Among the thousands of cultivators, there were also some people who could not help but follow in a low voice. The fear of the will of the heavens had already quietly been planted in their hearts. Boom! After the imperial edict was read, a loud sound of waves crashing against the rocks was heard. The entire imperial edict slowly closed, but that huge yellow dragon didn't disappear. When the imperial edict fell into Kong Hongwu's hands, Kong Hongwu gently sent it into the sky. Shua! The imperial edict was like a meteor that soared into the sky and hit the sky. The entire sky shook violently. A huge black hole flashed and a golden frame was revealed. The imperial edict fell into the black hole and disappeared. A dazzling brilliance that was more dazzling than the sun rushed out from the black hole. Everyone involuntarily closed their eyes. Roar! Without waiting for everyone to open their eyes, the coiling dragon looked up to the sky and roared. Its huge body began to swim toward the hole. In just a moment, the dragon disappeared into the hole, and the hole transformed into a dragon gate that was dozens of feet long. Whoosh whoosh! On the side of the dragon gate, the 9-colored pillar rapidly flashed and turned into thousands of 9-colored carps. These carps seemed to be going against the current as they rushed toward the dragon gate. Waves of heavenly music resounded, and all the carps that rushed through the dragon gate turned into dragons and roared into the 9 heavens. Fellow immortals! Amidst the heavenly music, Kong Hongwu straightened his body. His body expanded under the multicolored light, and Kong Hongwu said in a dignified manner, "Today, the dragon gate of the Jade Mountain will be opened, and it is the time for you fellow immortals to show off your skills. In order to welcome you fellow immortals, my Star Monarch Hall has specially asked the heavens to order us to prepare 3 unique treasures for you fellow immortals." As he spoke, Kong Hongwu took out a jade box from his wide sleeve. He looked around and said in a deep voice, "This is the ghost gall of the cold ghost gall. Legend has it that it is the ghost gall of the cold ghost gall of the tens of thousands of ghosts in the cold ghost gall of the cold ghost gall. Ordinary people would be injured by the ghostly chi within if they hastily looked at it. This item can be used by a great toolmaster to refine a cold imperial tool, and it can also be used to refine Dao Sec pills. Of course, the most important use is to help fellow immortals with special secret techniques break through their bottlenecks. If used properly, it can allow fellow immortals in the late stage of nascent soul to break through to the out-of-body stage. See, just as Kong Hongwu finished speaking, many people sucked in a breath of cold air. Their eyes were filled with admiration. Kong Hongwu's expression didn't change. He raised his hand, and the jade box flew into the sky. Just at that moment, a 9-colored carp transformed into a dragon flew past. With a roar, it opened its mouth and swallowed the jade box into its stomach. Immediately after, it charged into the multicolored dragon gate and disappeared. Immediately after, Kong Hongwu leisurely took out another jade box from his other sleeve. He raised his hand and said, "This is the ancestor of pure yang. Legend has it that all of the flames in the world were born from this item. It was harvested from the true sun star by our ancient Confucian divine ancestor. It has always been used to condense the most holy and most yang weapons. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to keep it, only cultivators with special secret techniques would be able to use it. It is different from the cold ghost gall. This item may not be able to help fellow immortals break through their bottlenecks, but if used to refine fellow immortals' magic treasures, it should be able to reach the spirit treasure realm. Wang. Kong Hongwu's words immediately ignited everyone's curiosity. Many people exclaimed in low voices. There was an ancient saying in the hidden immortal continent: magic treasures are easy to obtain. Spirit tools are hard to find. Immortal tools are impossible to find. On the hidden immortal continent, where the Dao sects flourished, magic weapons were commonly used by the Dao sects, and spiritual weapons with spirituality were extremely rare. As for immortal weapons that cultivators couldn't control, it was even more impossible to find traces of them. The reason why spirit tools were so rare was not only because there were very few cultivators who could refine spirit tools, but also because the materials that could refine spirit tools were even rarer. Now, this so-called ancestor of pure yang was actually able to refine spirit treasures that were a level higher than spirit tools. Which cultivator could remain calm? Even if they couldn't refine spirit tools, their innate greed had already grown out of their eyes. A pair of hands grabbed onto the jade box in Kong Hongwu's hand. Among the crowd of cultivators, Xiao Hua's eyes flashed with astonishment. He didn't know what the cold ghost gall was, and he didn't have this name in his memory. Moreover, this extremely cold item didn't have any special effect on Xiao Hua's cultivation, so he wasn't very tempted. But when he heard this ancestor of pure yang, Xiao Hua immediately thought of the innate true fire, and even the innate fire essence. However, when Kong Hongwu later said that this ancestor of pure yang was taken from the sun true star, Xiao Hua slightly shook his head. How could the innate fire essence be taken from the sun true star? Even Xiao Hua didn't think that this jade box could contain the innate fire essence. Looking at the greed in the eyes of the crowd of cultivators, Kong Hongwu faintly smiled. With a shake of his hand, the jade box soared into the sky and was swallowed by a flying dragon. A layer of strange flame suddenly appeared on the flying dragon's body, and it directly rushed into the dragon gate and disappeared. Almost all of the cultivators' eyes followed the flying dragon as it landed on the dragon gate. No one saw where Kong Hongwu took out the third jade box from. After the third jade box was taken out, Kong Hongwu didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly looked at the jade box for a moment. The entire Yaodai Mountain only had faint immortal music. All of the cultivators reluctantly shifted their gaze from the dragon gate. Many cultivators couldn't help but swallow their saliva and pricked up their ears, waiting for Kong Hongwu to speak. -12. Chapter 3597. This item seizes the fortune of the heavens, condenses the essence of heaven and earth, and gathers the blood of true dragons. It's called Green Abyss Dragon Saliva. Kong Hongwu said word by word, his tone full of admiration and regret. Perhaps there is a medicine of immortality in this world. Perhaps it exists in the hands of the Immortal Palace's Empress, but the medicine of immortality is hard to come by, and the fate of immortality cannot be expected. This Green Abyss Dragon Saliva can increase one's lifespan by 2,000 years. What's the difference between it and a mortal medicine of immortality? Alas, it's a pity that I'm not a Taoist, so I can't participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering. This item is reserved for a Taoist. While speaking, Kong Hongwu carefully waved his hand and the jade box was about to soar into the sky. At this moment, a voice familiar to Xiao Hua sounded from afar. Hall Master Kong, wait, what is Jinren? Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and looked at the figure that flew out. Oh, so it's Taoist Huada. Kong Hongwu's expression didn't change. He nodded slightly and said, is there anything I can help you with? I have something to ask Hall Master. Hua de Junren's gaze was very clear. He smiled and said, please speak. My Star Lord Hall doesn't have anything that can't be said to others. Taoist can ask. Kong Hongwu seemed to understand something and said with a smile, I was invited by Hall Master to come and watch the ceremony. Star Lord Hall's ceremony is spectacular and extremely respectful to our Taoist cultivators. I can represent the Taoist cultivators of the hidden immortal continent to thank Star Lord Hall for their hard work. Hua de Junren said and bowed on behalf of the cultivators. Kong Hongwu faintly smiled and raised his hand. This is my duty. It's nothing. Xiao Hua sneered. He knew that Kong Hongwu had arranged this long ago. Hua de Junren bowed to Kong Hongwu on behalf of the Taoist sections. Kong Hongwu actually just raised his hand and bowed back. The prestige of Confucian cultivators could be seen. Then Hua de Junren said, "But I feel that Hall Master Kong sealed the 3 treasures in the jade box and didn't let us see it. I feel that it's inappropriate. As the saying goes, seeing is believing. Who can guarantee that there's nothing in the jade box? The palace master is magnanimous, but he can't stop others from having other thoughts." What spiritual master said is very reasonable. This old man's thinking is lacking. Kong Hongwu nodded slightly, but when his gaze fell on the jade box, he said awkwardly, "It's just that this azure dragon saliva was sealed in this jade box by my Confucian sage with inscriptions. Only the magic of Taoist cultivators can open it. Once this jade box is opened, the item inside will be taken by the cultivator who opens it. This old man can't let Taoist and fellow immortals take a look." Well, Hua de Junren looked troubled. He waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, I'll trust you." After all, Star-Lord Hall. However, at this moment, Taoist Ching Su's voice rang out again. "Old man Huada, you may believe in the Star-Lord Hall, but we may not. How can you represent the Taoism of the world? What you said earlier was right. Seeing is believing. How can we be sure if we don't see for ourselves?" That's right, that's right." In an instant, voices of doubt rose and fell everywhere. Hua de Junren was furious. He pointed at Taoist Ching Su in the distance and said, "Old man Ching Su, you may not believe in my thousands of years of reputation, but how can you not believe in Star-Lord Hall's 100,000 or even 1,000,000 years of reputation? When has there ever been a mistake in the Jadestige meeting, which is held every 10 years? It hasn't happened before, but it doesn't mean it won't happen this time. It doesn't mean it won't happen in the future." Taoist Ching Su sneered, "And how can I know if there have been any mistakes in the past? I'm afraid only Star-Lord Hall knows. Or second brother Huada, you know that, right? You're being unreasonable." Hua de Junren was so angry that his face turned red. He looked up at Kong Hongwu and the 28 immortal generals and said, "This old man has never heard of a situation where the rare treasure invited by the Jadestige meeting was not honored. Haha, you two don't have to argue." Kong Hongwu said confidently with a smile, "Hua de Junren is this old man's good friend. This old man doesn't know this fellow Taoist. However, both of you are fighting for the Taoism cultivators and are the backbone of the Taoism cultivators. This old man is very comforted. Although this old man can't open this jade box without permission, this old man can swear a Confucian oath to prove that this jade box, and the previous 2 jade boxes, has the thing this old man is talking about." "Oh?" Hua de Junren was stunned. Obviously, Kong Hongwu's words were beyond his imagination. Ching Su Taoist was helpless. He thought for a bit and lowered his head. After all, a Confucian oath was similar to a Taoist oath. Once the oath was made, it would take effect immediately. "I, Kong Hongwu, as the Lord of Star-Lord Hall, as a Confucian Grandmaster, swear to the Star Saint of our Confucian ancestors." As Kong Hongwu recited the oath, thunder rumbled in the void. It was as if dozens of dragons fell on top of Kong Hongwu's head. At the same time, a crimson rainbow bridge fell from the sky and covered Kong Hongwu. "Today, I hold 3 jade boxes in my hand. The 3 items on Jadestige Mountain match what I said. If there is even the slightest difference, I will be smashed to pieces and my soul will be destroyed. My cultivation will not be able to advance, and I will never be able to step into the realm of literary saint for the rest of my life." Kacha. With a loud sound, dozens of thunderbolts fell on top of Kong Hongwu's head. The top of the crimson rainbow bridge condensed an extremely tiny crystal. This crystal was crimson in color and carried traces of bloody light. Once this crystal was formed, the crimson rainbow bridge immediately rolled back and disappeared into the horizon with this crystal. This is the oath of a Confucian cultivator? Xiao Hua was dumbstruck as he watched from the side. Damn it, isn't this kind of momentum too great? Compared to this, our Taoist oath is almost like whispers. Fellow immortal Huada, fellow immortal, what do you think? Kong Hongwu's tone was still indifferent. He asked softly, but there was an indescribable majesty in his voice. Hua Zhenren seemed to have woken up. He hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "Hall Master Kong is righteous and magnanimous. I admire you." Qing Su Daoist's face was also a bit pale. His eyes seemed to have a kind of greed. He stared at the jade boxes and didn't say anything else. "In that case, please." Kong Hongwu raised his hand. The jade boxes once again soared into the sky and fell into the dragon gate, disappearing. Everyone, except Xiao Hua, looked at the flying dragon with a burning gaze. They were reluctant to part with it. Cough, cough, fellow immortals. Kong Hongwu cleared his throat and said, "This old man has already sent the 3 treasures to the Yaodai Mountain. As for where they landed, this old man doesn't know. Either way, treasures have spirits. Those who are fated will get them. These 3 fated people must be among you fellow immortals. Of course, apart from these 3 treasures, the entire Yaodai Mountain will be open to all fellow immortals who are participating in the Yaodai gathering. Fellow immortals can get their own spiritual grasses and spiritual items. My Star Lord Hall won't interfere." The entire Yaodai Mountain? Xiao Hua was shocked. He heard from Li Xiang that every Yaodai gathering was a part of the Yaodai Mountain. He didn't seem to have heard that it was completely used. What's going on? Not to mention Xiao Hua, almost everyone was shocked. After all, this place was big, so the chances of finding treasures were reduced. "Many thanks for Hall Master Kong's help." Taoist Hua smiled and said, "This way, we Taoist cultivators can pick more spiritual fruits and find more spiritual items. No need to be so polite." Kong Hongwu waved his hand. "This is only a kind of compensation. Because this Yaodai gathering has a very small number of Imperial Tutors lots, this old man felt apologetic in his heart, so he specially sealed and opened a lot of spiritual lands for fellow immortals to pick." "Oh, how many are there?" Taoist Hua asked in surprise. Obviously, this was also out of his expectations. Kong Hongwu waved his big sleeve. Shua. Like a peacock spreading its tail, 10 rays of colorful light rushed out. 10 fist-sized objects that were somewhat similar to the Imperial Tutor seal fell in the air. This object looked like a leopard or a tiger. Its body was covered with layers of dragon scales. Layers of yellow mist emerged from the dragon scales, wrapping the entire Imperial Tutor's seal. Buy-in. Xiao Hua saw clearly through the light. It was actually the Bai, an Imperial Tutor's seal. "Ah, Hall Master Kong, are you kidding me? There are only 10 Imperial Tutor's lots?" Taoist Hua almost blurted out. "How is this enough?" "Sorry." Fellow immortal Hua, Kong Hongwu's face was full of apology. "This old man knows that there are too few Imperial Tutor's lots, so I opened the whole Yaodai Mountain. Moreover, this time the 3 rare treasures are really shocking. It's also a kind of compensation for fellow immortals of Taoist." "Alas, fine." Taoist Hua shook his head slightly and didn't speak again. His eyes were looking at the dragon gate, but no one knew what he was thinking. "Hall Master Kong, this year's Imperial Tutor's lots are too few." Taoist Qing Su said loudly, "Why don't you add more? Otherwise, this old man and others won't participate." Kong Hongwu shook his head slightly. "If you can add more, why do you need to ask? This is also the reason why I invited Taoist Hua to come here. If you don't want to participate, this old man won't force you." While speaking, Kong Hongwu waved his hand. Roar. Unexpectedly, 10 dragon roars came out from the Bai, an Imperial Tutor's seal. The Bai and outside the Imperial Tutor's seal seemed to come alive. It roared and rushed into the dragon gate with yellow clouds and disappeared. "Thank you, heavens, for your kindness. The ceremony is complete," Kong Hongwu murmured, and the sound of bamboo and string instruments rose again. The 28 immortal drums sounded like thunder again, and all the clouds began to roll violently again. They gradually shrank into the sky and connected with each other. Behind the 28 clouds, the immortal generals and immortal soldiers were also hidden in the clouds. Even the dragon gate, which was shrouded in 9 colors, had disappeared. Only the dragon gate, which was overflowing with light, stood majestically in the air, waiting for the dragonized carps to come back, or for the daring cultivators to charge in. -12. Chapter 3598. Fellow Immortals, the Dragon Gate to enter the Yaodai meeting is here. You can only enter but not leave. After 6 hours, the whole Yaodai mountain will still be sealed. The Dragon Gate can only be opened if you find 3 rare treasures and 10 Imperial Preceptor's lots. Of course, if you don't have such good luck and can't find all of them, the Dragon Gate will still be opened after a year. Kong Hongwu's figure didn't change. He said loudly, "Fellow immortals who want to get the rare treasures and the Imperial Preceptors, lots can enter the Dragon Gate now." Humph. Only 10 Imperial Preceptors lots. I don't want to die. Immortal Qing Su looked at the Dragon Gate. Although his eyes were full of desire and eagerness, he finally gritted his teeth and shouted. He turned around and flew out of the Yaodai mountain. Yes, although we are envious, we don't have such good luck. It's better to go back as soon as possible. Immediately after, another dozen or so golden core cultivators flew out from various places, mumbling as they followed spiritual master Qing Su and flew away. Kong Hongwu's expression didn't change. He just glanced at immortal Qing Su and the others and withdrew his gaze. Although such troublemakers didn't appear every time, he had seen many of them. In front of so many Taoist practitioners, he wouldn't show any difference. The Imperial Preceptor's lots are useless to me. I won't compete with the younger generation. At this time, Immortal Huada, who had been silent, said, "But I'm very interested in the Green Abyss Dragon Saliva. I want to enter the Dragon Gate to try my luck. I wonder if Hall Master Kong will agree?" Kong Hongwu was stunned, but he didn't show any reaction on his face. He just replied indifferently, "Fellow Immortal Huada, although I invited you to attend the meeting, any Taoist practitioner can participate in the Yaodai meeting. There's no limit to the number of times. Since you think the Green Abyss Dragon Saliva is useful to you, you can enter. You don't have to ask for my permission." Immortal Huada was now at the late nascent soul stage. Although he hadn't reached the peak, his cultivation had already reached the bottleneck. He couldn't break through it either by himself or by using some secret skills of Confucian practitioners. Seeing that his life was not far away, these 2,000 years was an irresistible temptation for him. In fact, if Immortal Qing Su didn't know that he might face Kong Hongwu's attack as soon as he entered the Dragon Gate, he would certainly rush into the Dragon Gate to participate in the Yaodai meeting without hesitation. Immortal Huada slightly clenched his teeth. Then he turned into a rainbow and disappeared into the Dragon Gate in an instant. Immortal Huada was Immortal Huada? Immortal Huada to Qing Su's Immortal Huada. As soon as Taoist Huada made his move, the other late nascent soul stage cultivators who coveted the Azure Nether Dragon Saliva were also unable to hold themselves back. Calm. Immortal Qing. Immortal Qing and Immortal Cultivators. Immortal Mountain. Kong Hongwu looked at them with an imperceptible smile on his face. His body slowly produced clouds and disappeared into the depths of the clouds in a moment. "Master!" Chang Yu and Wu Tian, who were standing beside Xiao Hua, swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said in a low voice, "Damn it! A lifespan of 2,000 years, if it weren't for Master, we would have entered the Jade Pavilion gathering to try our luck. If you want to go, go. This is a kind of blessing. Maybe you can get it." Xiao Hua smiled faintly. Chang Yu's heart moved. He couldn't help but look at the Dragon Gate. He was a cultivator at the late gold core stage. Among thousands of cultivators, he was considered to be in the upper class. "Senior Xiao." At this time, a respectful voice sounded. Xiao Hua turned his head and saw Zhu Chengli, who had left without saying goodbye earlier. Zhu Chengli respectfully bowed and said, "Junior met an old friend the day before yesterday and exchanged cultivation experiences with him. Junior has just come out of seclusion. Is Senior going to attend the Yaodai meeting today? If possible, Senior, please take care of me." Xiao Hua smiled. He just glanced at Zhu Chengli and didn't say anything. His heart was benevolent, but he wasn't an idiot. How could he take Zhu Chengli's words seriously? Moreover, there was also Chang Yu and Wu Tian's description. As a nascent soul cultivator, he naturally wouldn't attack Zhu Chengli. But how could he take care of Zhu Chengli? Zhu Chengli seemed to have anticipated the current awkwardness, so he remained calm. He smiled at Xiao Hua and said to Wu Tian, "Fellow Taoist Wu, since you're already here, why don't you come with me and Senior Chang to the Jade Pavilion conference? Wu Tian's face was calm. He said faintly, I'm already serving Master Xiao. With his guidance, I don't need any treasures. Ah, Zhu Chengli was stunned. He obviously didn't expect Xiao Hua to accept Wu Tian as his disciple. In addition to being surprised, his eyes couldn't help but have a kind of strong jealousy. Wu Tian's words were like a heavy hammer, waking Changyu up. Changyu also smiled and said, That's right. I'm also serving Master Xiao now. I don't need the state teacher's fortune anymore. As for the 2,000 years of life, I'm confident I can get it with Master Zhao's guidance. I also don't need to participate in this so-called Yaodai meeting. Zhu Chengli hid the regret in his heart. He took a deep breath and cupped his hands. Congratulations, fellow Taoists. I don't have much fortune, so I have to think of a way myself. I hope I'll be lucky enough to see the moment you two become masters. After saying that, he bowed to Xiao Hua again. Junior also wishes Senior to get what you want. Then, without waiting for Xiao Hua to say anything, he flew into the dragon gate and disappeared. Master, Changyu transmitted his voice. Disciple remembers that Zhu Chengli also went to Master's quiet room alone that day. Did Master not agree to his request? Xiao Hua smiled and transmitted his voice. Other people's opportunities are other people's. You don't need to ask. Even if other people are heartless, they're other people's. You don't need to know. Disciple understands. Changyu knew Xiao Hua was a gentleman. Although he wasn't satisfied with Zhu Chengli's actions, he wouldn't talk about Zhu Chengli's misdeeds in front of others. You can make your own arrangements. Xiao Hua waved his hand. When I come back from Yaodai Mountain, I'll look for you. As for this green abyss dragon saliva, you really don't need it. Yes, disciple understands. Changyu and Wu Tian bowed and said, Congratulations. Taoist Xiao to successfully obtain the lot for the state teacher. After saying that, the two turned around and flew away. Xiao Hua wasn't in a hurry to enter Yaodai Mountain. Instead, he pinched his chin and looked around carefully. Now, in the sky above Yaodai Mountain, other than that dragon gate, everything else was covered by red clouds. It was exactly the same as before. He couldn't see the true situation of Yaodai Mountain. At this moment, figures rushed in one after another at the dragon gate and disappeared one by one. Originally, there were several thousand cultivators, but now more than 30% had entered. Apart from Xiao Hua and the other cultivators who were still watching, about 20% of the cultivators were very decisive. They flew away one after another, not daring to delay here. 10 lots for the state teacher. Xiao Hua thought to himself. Pitifully few. However, if this Xiao acts, it won't be a problem to get one of them. In reality, even if I can't get the lot for the state teacher, it won't be a problem. If Xiao Jin and Changling want to revive Jiang country, they won't succeed in 10 or 20 years. This Xiao just needs to get it before they establish their country. Also, even if this Xiao doesn't have the lot for the state teacher, can't Jiang country sell dog meat and let old man Bagua of the Copper Pillar country take the position of state teacher? As to the green abyss dragon saliva, there are too many people fighting for it. This Xiao covets the 2,000-year lifespan, but if I really want to take it, I will have to be ruthless. This Xiao just entered Yuanying and has 2,000 years of lifespan. This Xiao has the 5-element righteous thunder to cultivate Yuanying. I fear that I won't need 1,000 years to enter late Yuanying. There should be enough time. Just as Xiao Hua was thinking, another familiar voice sounded from the distance. Fellow Taoist Xiao, can we travel together? Xiao Hua looked up. It was Hong Songzi flying over with a smile. Haha, of course. Xiao Hua smiled and moved his body to fly over. He raised his hands and answered. Unexpectedly, Hai Hongzi behind Hong Songzi frowned slightly and said with displeasure, Fellow Taoist Hong Songzi, we have been discussing how the three of us can work together these days. Also, the talisman I forged can only be used by the three of us. Adding on Taoist Xiao, how can we use it? Also, Taoist Zhao's strength is outstanding. If he joins us, we fear that the distribution we made before is not appropriate. Taoist Yuan Qing, who was flying beside Hai Hongzi, also glanced at Hai Hongzi with displeasure. He didn't expect that Hai Hongzi didn't send a sound transmission, but directly said these words in front of Xiao Hua. Even if Xiao Hua had self-restraint, he probably wouldn't be able to cooperate with them. Sure enough, Xiaohua smiled faintly, stopped in midair and said, "Fellow Taoist Hong Songzi, since you have already discussed, this Xiao will not rashly join this." Hong Songzi was very embarrassed and angry. He turned his head to look at Hai Hongzi. Unfortunately, Hai Hongzi only smiled apologetically at Xiaohua and ignored Hong Songzi. "This Xiao will go first." Xiaohua raised his hand and gestured slightly. His figure rushed through the sky and landed inside the dragon gate. With a flash of multicolored light, his figure disappeared. Hong Songzi retracted his gaze from the dragon gate and said coldly, "Hai Hongzi, what is the meaning of this? Didn't this old man already tell you before? Although I haven't discussed with Taoist Xiao these days, inviting him to join us is not too much, right?" Hai Hongzi was not afraid. He only smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Hong Songzi, the Taoist Xiao you mentioned before is a fellow Taoist with similar cultivation to us. Not this Taoist Xiao who is stronger than Taoist what? With such a strong fellow Taoist beside us, do you think we can get the Azure Nether Dragon saliva? Even if we get it, how much can we get? Also, fellow Taoist, don't forget that Taoist Huada is also participating in the Jade Pavilion meeting. His purpose is obviously the Azure Nether Dragon saliva. He and Xiao Hua can be said to be irreconcilable. Do you and I need to get involved?" Xiao Hua didn't dare to increase his soul sense for fear that he would destroy this transportation channel. He didn't know where he would end up. This transmission formation seemed to be very far away. Xiao Hua stayed in this passage for the time it took to eat a meal. During this time, there was no one in front of the passage. There were also no other cultivators chasing behind the passage. Presumably, every Taoist cultivator who entered the Dragon Gate would have such a legendary passage. Woo! Suddenly, in the passage not far in front of Xiao Hua, there was a whimper of wind. A dot of orange light suddenly appeared. Then, the passage in the clouds in front of Xiao Hua shrank towards this dot of light as if it was being pulled. Xiao Hua's figure also rushed towards this dot of light. Perhaps Xiao Hua was shrinking, or perhaps the dot of light was expanding. When Xiao Hua flew in front of the dot of light, that dot of light had already turned into a several zhang large light curtain. Xiao Hua's whole body flashed with golden light. When he swept with his soul sense, he was immediately bounced back by the light curtain. Although the inscriptions on the light curtain were tumbling, the aura it revealed was so docile that Xiao Hua couldn't feel any discomfort. Pa! With a soft and crisp sound, Xiao Hua crashed into the light curtain. The scene in front of his eyes overflowed, as if he had passed through several small worlds. When Xiao Hua's figure landed, he looked around and unconsciously frowned again. At this time, Xiao Hua was standing in a low valley. He was surrounded by several zhang cliffs. High up in the sky, several large clouds condensed into a vortex. The vortex gradually shrank, and one by one, the inscriptions disappeared alternately. There weren't any special spirit fruits or spirit herbs on the nearby cliffs. There were only a number of dark green things that crookedly covered the entire cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a deep pool. There were many small waterfalls around the deep pool. At the foot of the mountain, there were many small streams flowing from the cracks in the cliff and converging into the deep pool. The deep pool was dark green, and a chill mixed with rich world's yuan qi rushed into Xiao Hua's mouth and nose. At the edge of the deep pool, there were layers of needle-like leaves covering the ground. If he wasn't mistaken, they should be dark green things that fell down. Xiao Hua looked around and was a little surprised. He tried to release his soul sense. After exploring for a while, Xiao Hua finally had some understanding of the surroundings. The entire valley was sealed by a layer of restriction. This restriction was broken, and Xiao Hua's soul sense couldn't be considered complete. Moreover, where the restriction was intact, Xiao Hua's soul sense was suppressed and difficult to penetrate. However, where the restriction was broken, Xiao Hua's soul sense could vaguely penetrate, and he could see the spirit herbs growing high up in the cliff. This is a restriction. Xiao Hua already understood and thought to himself, it's no wonder that even though the heaven-earth origin qi here is so dense, there aren't any spirit herbs growing here. Only I, Xiao Hua, will be able to break through this restriction and escape to pick spirit fruits and search for treasures. But how can I break this restriction? Xiao Hua slowly flew towards the stone cliff, slowly searching. This is the Jasper Pavilion Gathering, a formation personally set up by the Star-Lord Hall. It should be able to trap a late nascent soul stage cultivator. I can't not be cautious. Near the cliff, Xiao Hua's soul sense swept over, and he didn't find anything strange. He touched the hard and cold stone wall with his hand, but he still didn't find anything. After Xiao Hua finished looking at the 4 stone cliffs, his gaze once again landed on the jade-green deep pool. This pool couldn't be considered big. It was even smaller than the cold pool in Yellow Flower Ridge. However, the cold air was twice as strong as the cold pool in Yellow Flower Ridge. This deep pool can absorb divine sense. Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over the pool, and he was immediately surprised. His eyes flashed with a trace of greed. After thinking for a moment, he plucked a few withered leaves from his space and casually threw them into the pool. The moment these withered leaves landed on the water surface, they only created ripples, and the entire leaf instantly sank into the pool. Weak water? Xiao Hua heard of this water that even leaves couldn't bear. He couldn't help but shout, "I'm rich!" Of course, the incomparably fierce innate primordial water in the eyes of others was absorbed into Xiao Hua's clear water bottle. What could this insignificant weak water count for? Perhaps in Xiao Hua's eyes, it could only be a treasure that could make him open his eyes. However, without waiting for Xiao Hua to land in midair, a chilly wind suddenly appeared and very strangely scraped the ground. A few needle-like leaves were lifted up by the chilly wind. Woo! The needle-like leaves streaked across the air, unexpectedly producing an even more strange whimpering sound. After the whimpering sound passed, a mournful sound rang out. Looking again at the surrounding needle-like leaves of the deep pool, it was as if they were being grabbed by a big hand, flying up into the air in an extremely orderly fashion. The needle-like leaves were gone, exposing the ground beside the pool. At this time, the ground was densely engraved with tiny inscriptions that looked like ants. These inscriptions had begun to squirm like living ants. Wisps of noble aura blew down rapidly with the sound of the wind. When these noble aura passed through the needle-like leaves, many of them were absorbed by the needle-like leaves. In just the blink of an eye, the cold air in the pool surged up even more. The needle-like leaves also swelled up to more than 10 inches. Now, the leaves revealed their original malevolence. They were actually sawtooth-shaped imperial tools. On these imperial tools, there were thin holes that couldn't be seen. In between the holes, there were layers of inscriptions. The mournful whimpering sound came from these holes. The inscriptions were still absorbing the awe-inspiring qi. Countless imperial tools continued to swell up. The entire valley is completely filled with these imperial tools. How much effort is needed to create this? Xiao Hua's gaze swept over, and he was slightly surprised. After all, this imperial array was not only particularly fine, but also covered a large area. He didn't know how much effort it took to create it. Sure enough, as the whirlwind in the valley grew stronger, the inscriptions also began to flicker. The wind borrowed the power of the inscriptions, and the inscriptions aided the might of the wind. The countless imperial tools quickly trembled in the whirlwind. Especially as the whirlwind rose up layer by layer, the inscriptions on the originally ordinary cliff also revealed inscriptions. These inscriptions were different from the inscriptions on the side of the pool. As the whirlwind blew, the inscriptions actually began to chant. Thick, awe-inspiring qi quickly descended from the sky and rushed into the whirlwind in the valley. Not only that, but what surprised Xiao Hua the most was that when the cold air in the pool rushed into the whirlwind, countless imperial tools began to condense white frost. A kind of austere, killing intent gradually emerged from the whirlwind and quickly diffused throughout the entire valley. The cold wind cut the face, and the frost pierced the heart. Xiao Hua nodded inwardly. The imperial array in the valley had already become like this in just a few breaths. If it was activated, how terrible would it be? Moreover, this imperial array had sealed off the entire valley. If a Dao sect cultivator below the early stage of the Gold Core realm fell into this array, it would be difficult for them to escape. Even if they could forcefully break out of the array, their cultivation would be greatly damaged. -12.